Chapter 218. Clang. The sound of a heavy object hitting the ground woke Feng Zichen up from his cultivation. What's this? Opening his eyes, Feng Zichen saw a small piece of jade on the ground below the Chaos Fiend God. Obviously, this piece of jade had fallen from him. Although this piece of jade was called a small piece, it was actually not small. It was about 100,000 feet tall. It was just that the Chaos Fiend God next to it was too huge, which made it look extremely small. This jade was purple, and there was a faint purple flow, revealing a noble aura. There were also thousands of Daos surrounding it, as if it was the sect of the Great Tao and the master of all Daos, which could suppress the universe, the past, and the future. It's Pangu's aura. From this piece of purple jade, Feng Zichen felt a familiar aura. It was Pangu's aura. Then, he seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but shake his body and transform into 1,000,000 feet high to take a closer look at the purple jade. Sure enough. After his body grew bigger, Feng Zichen looked at the purple jade again. He then had a panoramic view of its size and made a different discovery. The more he looked at the shape of the purple jade, the more it looked like a phalanx. When he compared it with his own phalanx, he found that there were indeed similarities. In this way, Feng Zichen was sure. This purple jade was a phalanx of Pangu. One had to know that Feng Zichen's physical body was originally modeled after Pangu's Taoist body. Its internal structure and shape were roughly similar to Pangu's Taoist body, only the details were different. This purple jade was more than 80% similar to Feng Zichen's phalanx. Moreover, this jade contained the pure aura of Pangu. Its origin was self-evident. No wonder this Chaos Fiend God died so thoroughly that even his physical body was almost destroyed. It turns out that between his eyebrows, there is a section of Pangu's finger bone that is constantly releasing power and obliterating everything about him. At first, Feng Zichen was still puzzled. Although Pangu was strong, the Chaos Fiend God was not weak either. How could Pangu's remaining power maintain such a powerful force and constantly destroy the body of the Chaos Demon God after so many years? Now, after seeing Pangu's finger bone, Feng Zichen understood everything. With this item, Pangu's power would be endless. What a great fortune! What a great opportunity! After the shock, Feng Zichen's heart was filled with excitement. In the untainted land, anything that had something to do with Pangu was a good thing. They could be favored by the heavens and earth and had great luck. What's more, this was Pangu's finger bone. If this item was not used to kill the Chaos Fiend God but fell into the untainted land, it would most likely give birth to intelligence and turn into a Khanate Fiend God, becoming a powerful expert in the untainted land. However, that was when Pangu's finger bone was in its peak state. Now, it did not have this ability. After fighting with the Chaos Fiend God for so many years, the body of the Chaos Fiend God was almost destroyed. Pangu's finger bone was also consumed. Its origin had long been exhausted, and its charm of the Great Tao was almost gone. Only the hard bone body was still the same. Still, if Pangu's finger bone was still in its peak state, it would have been taken by Hongjun long ago. It had been taken away by Hongjun Taoist many years ago. How could it be left for Feng Zichen? However, as long as Pangu's finger bone was not completely destroyed, it was still a treasure of the untainted land and would be of great use to Feng Zichen. Pangu's finger bone was one of Pangu's body parts. It naturally occupied a portion of the Khanate luck of the untainted land. Daoist Hongjun might not care about this bit of luck, but Feng Zichen did. As long as this item was enshrined in the ancestral temple of the human race, it would be blessed by the Khanate luck. It could also suppress the luck of the human race and protect the human race from extinguishing. It could also be favored by heaven and earth and give birth to more geniuses. Therefore, Pangu's finger bone had a great symbolic meaning in addition to its practical significance. First, he released the aura of Pangu's Tao body with all his strength. Then, he activated the Khanate merit in his body. Feng Zichen tried to make his aura as close as possible to Pangu. Only then did he walk forward and grab Pangu's finger bone. Perhaps it was the aura of Pangu on Feng Zichen's body that worked. Pangu's finger bone was held in his hand without any resistance. Suddenly, a purple light bloomed. An extremely ancient picture came out of Pangu's finger bone and poured into Feng Zichen's sea of consciousness. That was the picture when heaven and earth were first created. At the beginning of the untainted land, Pangu was exhausted and fell down. When his body turned into all things, a demon god of chaos suddenly appeared. Taking advantage of Pangu's weakness, he attacked the untainted land crazily, trying to destroy this world and recreate the chaos. At that time, Pangu's flesh and blood had all melted, leaving only a skeleton. He raised his right hand and pointed at the demon god of chaos's forehead. Even at this time, Pangu's trend of turning into all things did not weaken. Instead, it became more serious. He had just used all his remaining strength to kill the demon god of chaos. Before he could retract his arm, his skeleton scattered and merged into the untainted land. One of the finger bones stayed in the demon god of chaos's forehead and fell to the bottom of the ultimate with him. This demon god of chaos really doesn't know what's good for him. It was not easy to survive the heaven-splitting tribulation, but he doesn't know how to cherish it. Instead of going to the depths of the chaos to heal his injuries, he went to the untainted land to die. What a fool. The heaven-splitting tribulation was so terrifying that even the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian, who was known as the primordial chaos and was indestructible and eternal, had fallen many times. Even the existences above the primordial chaos had fallen in the tribulation. It could be said to be the most widespread, most profound, and most powerful tribulation in history. That demon god of chaos could survive this tribulation. It was a good fortune that he could not ask for. But he went to die with all his heart, which made people a little speechless. Perhaps Pangu's exhaustion gave him great confidence, which made him do such an unwise thing. At the end of the cultivation, the gap of a line was the gap between heaven and earth. It was unreachable. Why didn't that demon god of chaos understand? For example, Hongjun Taoist was now seriously injured and dying. If he appeared in front of Feng Zichen, he would definitely not dare to attack. The gap between him and Hongjun Taoist could no longer be described in words. Even if Hongjun Taoist lay still and let Feng Zichen attack him for years, he would not be hurt at all. They were not creatures of the same dimension. It was already a great fortune to be able to touch him, let alone hurt him. And that was the gap between demon god of chaos and Pangu. However, if it wasn't for that, how could I have the opportunity today? If demon god of chaos had run away at that time, this opportunity would have been gone. Putting away Pangu's finger bones, Feng Zichen turned around and looked at the Tree of World. At this time, the body of demon god of chaos had been completely swallowed by it. Because of this, the Tree of World had undergone an amazing transformation. The height of the tree was immeasurable, and the size of the tree crown was unknown. The size of the Tree of World had touched the concept of size. Chapter 219. Now, the Tree of World finally has the power to support the world. After looking at the Tree of World for a while, Feng Zichen nodded satisfactorily. The Tree of World's origin had surpassed most sage-to-be experts and was infinitely close to Daluo Jingxian. When it reached a level comparable to a sage, it could try to replace Mount Buzhou and support the Eldritch world. Moreover, the changes of the Tree of World were not limited to that. Khanate Daos manifested on its body and hundreds of millions of Daos surrounded it. It was clearly visible and shocking. Just one look at it could enlighten people. It was like a carrier of the great Tao in the world and could receive the great Tao. It was as if one could reach the end of the great Tao by following its branches and climbing up. No, it was not as if. It was real. If someone could withstand the boundless pressure and reach the top of the Tree of World, they would immediately become Daluo Jingxian without any repercussions. If the Tree of World went one step further and reached its crown, they would be enlightened by the great Tao and save hundreds of millions of years of cultivation. They would directly become Daluo Jingxian. It was like reaching the sky in one step. Is this the true power of the chaos spiritual root? It's indeed much more powerful than the Khanate spiritual root. Reaching the crown of the Tree of World would make one Daluo Jingxian. There was nothing in the Eldritch world that could compare to the Tree of World. That's right. Only such a treasure could support the eldritch world. Otherwise, if it was a connate spiritual root, it would be crushed by the eldritch world's weight. Feng Zichen stopped paying attention to the Tree of World and looked at the 3,000 sectors. That was where the survival of the human race was. Countless light balls surrounded the Tree of World. They were magnificent and had endless Taoist rhymes flowing around them. Among them, the 3,000 sectors were the most dazzling and had the densest Taoist rhymes. These were the 3,000 sectors. They were the worlds formed by the origin of the eldritch world and the chaos chi. They were the associated worlds of the eldritch world. According to the normal course of history, after the shaman tribulation, these sectors absorbed the fragments of the eldritch world and were born. After that, at the end of the investiture of the gods' tribulation, the 5 sages fought and completely shattered the primitive world. The fragments of heaven and earth flowed towards the millions of small, medium and large worlds, causing them to evolve completely. Finally, after the journey to the West Calamity. After a long period of development, these large, medium, and small kiliacosms had already possessed a certain level of strength. Only then did they gradually begin to connect with the primordial world. But now, with the help of the Tree of World, more than a dozen worlds had been born among the 3,000 sectors, and more worlds were about to be born. Compared to the normal speed, it was an entire aeon ahead of time. What happened? I can only look, but not enter. Seeing the birth of the great 1,000 realms, Feng Zichen casually picked one and stepped forward, intending to enter the great 1,000 realms to search for opportunities. However, there was a mysterious force that came and blocked him from the world, not allowing him to take a step forward. At the same time, the great 1,000 world that he was about to enter had also changed. The will of the world descended. It was incomparably vast, and the entire world was shaking, emitting a terrifying force that was ready to move. It seemed that as long as Feng Zichen dared to take a step forward, this force would attack him and kill him at all costs. Is it because I'm too powerful? A message appeared in Feng Zichen's sea of consciousness, allowing him to understand the reason for this change. The world had just been born, and the world had not yet stabilized. The rules of the Great Path were not yet perfect, and the entire world was extremely fragile. If he was not careful, he would be in danger of being destroyed. Daluo Jingxian was an existence that had achieved the Great Path. Its essence was already comparable to the Great 1,000 Realms. Even if it was not as good as the Great 1,000 Realms, the difference would not be too great. If such an existence rashly stepped into the new world, the aura of the Great Path that he carried would inevitably conflict with the Great Path that was born in the world itself. At that time, the already unstable world would be impacted by the Great Path. If it triggered a riot of the laws of heaven and earth. Even if the world was not destroyed, its origin would be greatly damaged, and its grade would drop. Although the probability of this happening was very small, almost none. As long as Daluo Jingxian withdrew his strength with all his might, he could put an end to this. However, every great 1,000 world was a treasure of the primordial world. It was of great help to the evolution of the Great Path. Even if there was a slight possibility, the Great Path had to put an end to it. Therefore, in order to protect the new Great 1,000 world, the Great Path would never allow Daluo Jingxian to step into it. At the very least, before the Great 1,000 world stabilized, this situation would continue. Not only that, when the Great 1,000 world was just born, the will of the world was hazy, and it did not have a clear understanding of things. Once it sensed a threat, it would definitely go all out and destroy everything that could threaten it. Even if there was no obstruction from the Great Path, as soon as Feng Zichen approached the Great 1,000 world, what awaited him would probably be the full force of the world. It's fine if Daluo Jingxian can't enter. Anyway, there aren't many Daluo Jingxian in the human race. Moreover, this path of retreat is not prepared for Daluo Jingxian, but for those outstanding clansmen. As long as the clansmen can enter, there won't be a problem. Feng Zichen did not insist that he could not enter the Great 1,000 world. No matter how good the opportunities of the Great 1,000 world were, how could they compare to the opportunities of the primordial world? Previously, he wanted to enter because he was curious. However, if I can't enter, there's no harm in taking a look in advance. Finally, he was a little curious. Feng Zichen released his spiritual will and looked at the great thousand world from afar. With just a glance, everything in that world was reflected in Feng Zichen's eyes. It was an ancient world with mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and stars. It was somewhat similar to the primordial world, but it was far from as vast as the primordial world. Even Mount Kunlun and Mount Meru were larger than this world. In fact, the essence of any of the primordial world's main stars far surpassed this world. This great thousand world is also, after getting used to the scenery of the primordial world, Feng Zichen felt that this world was extremely small and could not help but feel a little disappointed. As he continued looking, Feng Zichen discovered the aura of 6 lives. These were the Khanate god fiends born in this world. In terms of the origin of this world, at most, 9 Khanate god fiends could be born. Any more and it would hurt the origin of the world. In this aspect, it was far from being comparable to the primordial world. That was because, not to mention 9 Khanate god fiends, even if there were 9,000 or 90,000 Khanate god fiends, there might not be any in the primordial world. From this, it can be seen that the origin of the primordial world is really thick beyond imagination. The strength of the great Taoist priest's Pangu is really powerful. The more he knew, the more he understood how powerful Pangu was. Chapter 220. Is this the great wide world? It's a little disappointing. Feng Zichen retracted his divine sense and sighed. After observing for a period of time, he discovered that the origin of the great wide world was limited. The upper limit had been fixed, and Daluo Jingxian was its limit. In other words, Daluo Jingxian was the limit of cultivation in the great wide world. There was no possibility of attaining the primordial chaos. If he wanted to take a step forward, he had to leave this world, go to the primordial world, or rush to the chaos. Compared to the primordial world, the billions of worlds were just dust. In the primordial world, countless Daluo Jingxian and stronger primordial chaos experts could be born. There were even existences above the primordial chaos. That was because the primordial world was a world formed by Pangu when he broke through the origin of the chaos. After it was created, it absorbed the origin of Pangu and many chaos demon gods. That was why the primordial world was so powerful. In order to take a step forward and attain the great Tao, Pangu broke through to an indescribable realm. Thus, he broke through the origin of the chaos and created the primordial world to verify his great Tao. The origin of the chaos was damaged, and the 3,000 chaos demon gods were affected. They woke up from their cultivation and rushed to the depths of the chaos to stop Pangu from creating a world. After a great battle, the 3,000 chaos demon gods and Pangu died one after another. The primordial world became the final winner and obtained the greatest benefits. It created the current grand situation of the primordial world. There were as many Daluo Jingxian as there were dogs, and there were sage-to-be experts everywhere. The establishment of the primordial world was unique and could not be replicated. It was also the greatest creation in the entire chaos. That was because there was no second Pangu and 3,000 chaos demon gods in the entire chaos. Not to mention, they had to integrate their origin into a world. Being born in the primordial world is also a kind of opportunity. In the end, Feng Zichen sighed. Compared to the creatures born in the great wide world, the creatures of the primordial world were undoubtedly lucky. They were born knowing that there was a quasi-sage above Daluo Jingxian, primordial chaos above quasi-sage, and even more powerful realms above primordial chaos. They did not have to worry about the path ahead being cut off because there was no upper limit to the primordial world. There were infinite possibilities. Daluo Jingxian was the end of all living beings in the vast thousand domains. Moreover, the world's origin was limited, so the number of Daluo Jingxian was also limited. The predecessors had proven their Tao before. No matter how peerless their talents were, no matter how stunning the future generations were, there was no Tao that could be proven. It was truly despairing. Therefore, it was a great opportunity to be born in the primordial world. At the starting line, they already had the advantage. However, this is also good. Compared to the primeval age, the greater Kiliacosm is definitely much safer and more suitable for the postnatal human race to survive. When a world's origin was weak, the power of the laws of heaven and earth would also weaken accordingly. Perhaps the human race would be like fish in water in the great wide world. On the eve of the massacre tribulation, I will find an opportunity to send some of my people to the great thousand world to wait for the future. After secretly making up his mind, Feng Zichen waved his hand and took back the world tree. He turned around and flew up. He had stayed in the void end for quite some time. It was time to return to the primordial world. After all, there were still a lot of things waiting for him to deal with in the primordial world. Of course, more importantly, although the Khanate sword Tao had been condensed, it still needed to be verified with heaven and earth and imprinted in the primordial world's origin before it could be considered complete. Whoosh whoosh, the void end was a huge whirlpool. Only then could it release endless suction force and suck in all the waste gas and impure air in the primordial world and sink to the bottom of the void end. It was also because of this that it was easy to enter the void end but difficult to leave. If one wanted to leave the void end, one could only use powerful strength to resist the omnipresent suction force of the void end and go against the flow. However, Feng Zichen was not one of them. As soon as he made his move, the void suddenly changed. A passage appeared that led to the outside world. It was the will of the void end that had descended and taken the initiative to send him away. If such treatment were to spread, countless people would be envious. Thank you. With a loud laugh, Feng Zichen walked into the passageway and left the void end. In the blink of an eye, 20,000 years have passed. Time really flies. Above the North Sea, Feng Zichen calculated with his fingers and knew that 20,000 years had passed since he fell into the void end. However, these 20,000 years were worth it. Thinking back to his experiences in the past 20,000 years, Feng Zichen was filled with excitement. He headed to the chaos and successfully attained the Tao of Daluo Jingxian. He obtained the recognition of the great Tao and became a Khanate god fiend. He devoured the body of the chaos fiend celestial and caused the world tree to transform. He successfully condensed the Khanate sword Tao and added another Khanate Tao to the primordial world. He could obtain the favor of heaven and earth and become a Khanate Tao ancestor. He obtained Pangu's finger bone and could suppress the destiny of the human race. He refined the void and Tao embryo and obtained a Khanate god fiend avatar. He had laid a firm foundation for controlling the void end in the future. Each of these fortuitous encounters alone was enough to shock the world. Furthermore, there were so many shocking opportunities stacked together. It was an opportunity that others could not even dream of. Of course, among these opportunities, apart from Daluo Jingxian, who had successfully attained the Tao, it was most important to obtain the recognition of the great Tao and be bestowed a divine name. Pangu's Zichen clan. This name wasn't just for show. It contained boundless meaning, great opportunities, great creation, and great luck. Pangu, the founder of the primordial world, could be said to be the father of all things. In the primordial world, anything related to him would be protected by heaven and earth. They would not be blessed and would have long luck. Before his name, he had the name Pangu. In the primordial world, it represented the authentic Pangu. Just like the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral magi, they had an incomparably noble status and incomparable luck. Moreover, Feng Zichen's identity was recognized by the great Tao. Apart from the Pangu, no one could deny it. His status had risen from the lowest postnatal life form of the primordial world to the top Khanate saint of the primordial world. Moreover, he had inherited the name of Pangu. With this identity, Feng Zichen would not dare to be arrogant when he walked in the primordial world in the future. He would have to address him as fellow Daoist Zichen to show his respect for Pangu. If the current Feng Zichen went to the west, Daoist Juan Ti would not dare to forcefully bring him back to Mount Meru like before. That way, he would be hated by heaven and earth and his luck would be damaged. With the importance that the Western saints placed on luck, they would not do anything that damaged their luck unless they had no choice. This identity can be considered the top second generation of the primordial world. Thinking of the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral magi, Feng Zichen was a little excited. They were the top figures in the primordial world, existences that could do anything they wanted. With this identity and his trump card, Feng Zichen's future would definitely not be inferior to theirs. Why think so much? Now, it's more important to prove the sword Dao. Shaking his head, Feng Zichen said. Chapter 221. Above the North Sea, Feng Zichen held the Zichen sword in his hand and engraved 81 connate runes in the void, which were shining brightly. The runes were surrounded by connate Taoist rhymes and were surrounded by sword intent. They were runes that belonged to the connate sword Dao and were the cornerstone of it. When all 81 connate runes were born, Feng Zichen suddenly raised the Zichen sword in his hand and announced to the sky, heavens. Today, the Panga Zichen clan has peeped into the secrets of the great Dao and created another connate Dao apart from the connate Dao. It's called the sword Dao. Today, I want to establish the sword Dao, integrate the sword theory of the primitive world, set the general outline of the sword Dao, and write the connate sword pattern. I want to establish another path of transcendence for all living beings and add another connate Dao to the world. This will stabilize the primitive world and strengthen the origin of the world so that all living beings can transcend and the evolution of the heavenly Dao can accelerate. All living beings in the primitive world, regardless of whether they have money or not, can cultivate this Dao as long as they have the heart to seek the sword. Today, I follow the heavens and answer the Dao. I use the connate spiritual treasure Zichen sword to carry the connate sword Dao and turn it into a Dao inheriting weapon to gather the boundless luck of the sword Dao. Heaven and earth bear witness. Connate sword Dao, establish. As soon as he finished speaking, the world changed color and the entire North Sea dimmed. A terrifying force appeared above the North Sea and kept surging majestically, shocking the entire primitive world. This was the wrath of the heavenly Dao. Someone actually went against the heavens and transformed an acquired object into a connate chi object. It was really unforgivable. Rumble. Hiss. The reaction of the heavenly Dao is so strong. Feng Zichen said in shock as he suppressed the discomfort in his body. He was already Daluo Jingxian and his body was comparable to a connate spiritual treasure. However, his chi and blood were tumbling and his consciousness sea was turbulent with just a rumble of thunder. He was almost injured. If the real heavenly punishment struck down, it would be terrible. A thunderbolt would probably take half of his life. This divine punishment was definitely not at the level of Daluo Jingxian. It was specially prepared for sage-to-be experts. North Sea, what happened? Why would the heavenly Dao be so furious? Feeling the vast power of the heavenly Dao, many powerful cultivators looked towards the North Sea, wanting to see what had caused the heavenly Dao to be enraged and send down heavenly punishment. However, the power of the way of the heavens enveloped the entire North Sea, blocking the vision of the great adepts. For a moment, they were unable to see what was happening in the North Sea. The North Sea is Kuan Peng's territory. Does this have something to do with him? Not necessarily. A few years ago, Zenyuanzi went to the North Sea to look for the Kuanpeng. He has been fighting with the Kuanpeng in the North Sea and hasn't returned yet. Perhaps they were really angry and destroyed an important place in the North Sea, causing this disaster. Many great adepts couldn't see the situation in the North Sea, so they couldn't help but calculate in their hearts. However, the power of the way of the heavens suppressed everything. Even the secrets of the heavens were suppressed. Their calculation methods immediately lost their effect. However, they were really curious. They couldn't help but discuss with each other according to what they already knew. They related this matter to Kuan Peng and Zenyuanzi. Not to mention the many great adepts, the way of the heavens could block the spying outside the North Sea, but it couldn't block the gaze inside the North Sea. As soon as the change in the North Sea happened, 3 great adepts who stayed in the North Sea looked over. That's right. Hongjun really didn't lie to me this time. This child has indeed obtained a great opportunity in the ultimate. In the North Pole, the black tortoise sacred beast stroked its beard and said with a smile. As soon as Feng Zichen came out of the ultimate, the black tortoise sacred beast sensed it. The black tortoise holy beast knew that he must have obtained a great opportunity in the sinkhole just by seeing his cultivation as a zenith heaven golden immortal. However, after seeing that Feng Zichen was not injured, the black tortoise sacred beast retracted its gaze and no longer paid attention to him. Everyone had their own fate, and outsiders couldn't force it. Whatever opportunity Feng Zichen obtained had nothing to do with him, and he didn't care. However, Feng Zichen came to the North Sea this time to visit him, so he couldn't be born here. Otherwise, losing face was a small matter, but the death of his benefactor would affect his Tao heart. Therefore, the black tortoise sacred beast had been paying attention to Feng Zichen and tried its best not to let him be born. However, what the black tortoise sacred beast didn't expect was that as soon as he retracted his gaze, Feng Zichen couldn't wait to establish the Khanate sword Tao. Therefore, he angered the way of the heavens and attracted the heavenly punishment. This made it difficult for him to help. The heavenly punishment only came for one person, but if an outsider helped, the power of the heavenly punishment would multiply. At that time, it would be trouble for the two of them. Forget it, after all, Daluo Jinxian is immortal. Even the heavenly punishment can't kill him completely. If he falls in the heavenly punishment, I'll help him to be resurrected. It's a good thing that he falls once. It can make him remember and think more before he does anything. Thinking of this, the black tortoise sacred beast was relieved and silently watched the development of the situation. Daluo Jinxian was immortal. No matter how strong the heavenly punishment was, it couldn't kill Feng Zichen. It was good to let him suffer a little. After all, Feng Zichen's life had been too smooth since his debut. This wasn't good. Heavenly punishment? Who is that person? What kind of heaven-defying thing did he do? What made the way of the heavens so angry that it sent down the heavenly punishment of the sage to be level? On the other side, Zhen Yuanzi and Kuanpeng, who were fighting, sensed the heavenly punishment and stopped at the same time and looked at Feng Zichen. Hiss! What a pure Pangu aura! Panga Zichen clan? I didn't expect that in addition to the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestors of sorcery, there are other authentic Panga clans in the untainted land. But, where did this person come from? Why haven't I heard of his name before? The first thing that attracted the two of them when they looked at Feng Zichen was not the congenital runes floating in the air, but the Pangu aura emitted by Feng Zichen. The aura was so pure that it was not inferior to the Pangu aura of the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestors of sorcery. Clearly, this was another true lineage of Pangu. As everyone knew, in the untainted land, only the 3 pure ones, which were transformed by the primordial spirit of Pangu, and the 12 ancestors of sorcery, which were transformed by the essence and blood of the heart, were authentic Panga clans. The rest, such as Xing Tian, were congenital grand sorcerers, which were transformed by the blood of Pangu, and the congenital gods and demons, which were transformed by the remains of Pangu, were not authentic Panga clans. Now, in the untainted land, there was suddenly an authentic Panga clans. How could this not surprise the two of them? This was a big event that shocked the untainted land. What the two of them thought had nothing to do with Feng Zichen, and he didn't care about them. Because at this time, he was like an arrow on the bow, and he had to shoot. Chapter 222. Although he had long expected that the birth of the Khanate sword Tao would bring about a great calamity, he was also prepared, but he did not expect that the calamity would come so quickly and fiercely. It was far beyond what he could bear. For a moment, Feng Zichen felt a little regretful. He felt that he should not be so hasty. He should wait until his strength reached a higher level before trying to establish the Khanate sword Tao. However, at this point, he could no longer retreat. He could only bite the bullet. Moreover, he had many trump cards, a lot of merit, and Panga's luck. With all these advantages combined, he might have a chance to break through the heavenly punishment and establish the Khanate sword Tao. Khanate sword Tao, condense. Without waiting for the heavenly punishment to descend, Feng Zichen activated 8 Khanate runes and turned them into a sword of sword Tao. It carried the supreme sword intent and took the initiative to attack the sky. Rumble. Feng Zichen's actions seemed to be a provocation, which made the way of heaven even more furious. The entire cloud layer was tumbling and surging. A terrifying force gathered and turned into a mighty thunderbolt that struck down with a loud bang. Crack. With just one strike, the long sword formed by the sword Tao was cracked. It was full of cracks like porcelain that would break at any time. What an unfamiliar aura. At this time, Jin Yuanzi and Kuan Peng had just recovered from the shock and were attracted by the Khanate sword Tao. That is, a new Khanate Dao, a Khanate Dao that has never appeared before. It is a Khanate Dao transformed from a postnatal Dao. Yes. Only this can make the heavenly Dao so angry and send down a sage-level heavenly punishment. The two of them were very knowledgeable. After seeing this scene, how could they not guess what Feng Zichen's actions meant? Naturally, they understood the reason for the heavenly Dao's anger. Going against the Khanate Dao was a taboo of the heavenly Dao. It could not tolerate it. Anyone or anything that dared to do this would be punished by the heavenly punishment. Whether it was beneficial to the world or not, it was the same. It was the same. After all, to the heavenly Dao, punishing first and then rewarding was also a method. This person is indeed worthy of being Pangu's descendant. As soon as he was born, he did something that has never been done before. He wants to add another Khanate Dao to the primordial world. To pave a new path for all living beings. This person's comprehension is extremely high and he has great wisdom. The poor way is far inferior to him. Looking at Feng Zichen, who took the initiative to attack divine punishment, Zhen Yuanzi sighed with emotion. Kuanping Taoist's expression changed, but he did not refute. Apparently, he agreed with Zhen Yuanzi's words. The post-celestial Dao was reversed into the pre-celestial Dao. This method was something that they would never have thought of. It wasn't until they saw this scene that they suddenly realized, so, confirming the Dao could be done this way. Using this method to attain the Dao was much more powerful than the Dao attainment methods that were circulating in the primordial world. In this regard, Feng Zichen was much more capable than they could ever imagine. The sudden appearance of an authentic Pangu was already a major event that shook the primordial world. But from the looks of it now, that was not all. There might be another Khanate Dao in the primordial world. What kind of storm would it cause? The primordial world was about to change again. Boom! 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 Above the sky, after the thunderbolt struck down from the clouds, it did not stop. Instead, it continued to roll and gather strength, striking down 3 consecutive bolts of divine punishment thunder. In an instant, the long sword formed by the sword Dao could not withstand the power of divine punishment and shattered on the spot. It turned back into 81 Khanate runes and struggled in the sea of thunder. The power of divine punishment was extremely terrifying. The power of the Khanate runes was limited. They would not be able to last long in the sea of thunder and would be obliterated. At that time, the establishment of the Khanate sword Dao would be considered a complete failure. Then, divine punishment would find Feng Zichen. Divine punishment is so terrifying. Seeing the power of divine punishment, Feng Zichen could not help but feel his scalp tingle. However, establishing the Khanate sword Dao was related to his future path. He could not afford to fail. In the clouds, terrifying power filled the air. The 4th bolt of divine punishment thunder gradually formed and was about to strike. Seeing this, Feng Zichen did not dare to hesitate. He immediately calmed down and contacted the Tree of World. He planned to use its power to fight with his life on the line. After swallowing the body of the Chaos Fiend God, the Tree of World had undergone a huge transformation. Its origin had been improved like never before. Its strength was no less than that of the top grand divines in the primordial world, and was close to Daluo Jingxian. Although the power of the Tree of World could not make Feng Zichen as strong as a grand divines, it could make him as strong as a sage to be for a short time. In this way, it would be much easier to deal with the divine punishment at the sage to be level. However, just as the power of the Tree of World was about to enter Feng Zichen's body, something strange happened again. Boom! A mighty power came, shaking the entire North Sea, no, the entire primordial world. Then, under the incredulous gaze of the grand divines, tens of thousands of Dao fell. The origin of heaven and earth appeared in the world and smashed toward the divine punishment that covered the entire North Sea. Is the primordial world going to change? The origin of heaven and earth is fighting with the way of heaven. Seeing this scene, the group of great divines all felt that this matter was extremely absurd. As 2 sides of the same coin, how could the way of heaven and the origin of heaven and earth fight? However, what was happening in front of them was telling them that such a ridiculous thing had really happened. At this moment, even the sages who did not pay attention to this matter could not help but look down at the North Sea. In the sky above the North Sea, the divine punishment was suddenly attacked and began to collapse uncontrollably. The attack of the origin of heaven and earth was equivalent to the attack of the primordial world. How many people in the primordial world could resist it? The divine punishment at the sage-to-be level was naturally no match for it. Of course, even if the divine punishment had the strength, it would not dare to attack the origin of heaven and earth. That was the origin of heaven and earth. It was the foundation of the primordial world and also the foundation of the way of heaven. Once it was damaged, it would be a big deal and the consequences would be unimaginable. The way of heaven would not attack itself. Well, what's going on? This ridiculous scene made Feng Zichen a little confused. He did not know the reason at all. However, after all, he had become Daluo Jinxian. He was at a different level. He was more distant and ethereal. In the blink of an eye, he regained his composure and deduced the reason for this matter by following his perception. I see. Although the birth of the Khanate Sword Dao was a heaven-defying act, it could bring unimaginable benefits to the primordial world. In order to maintain the order of the primordial world, the way of heaven had to attack the Khanate Sword Dao and stop it from doing heaven-defying things. However, the origin of heaven and earth was different from the way of heaven. It did not care whether the Khanate Sword Dao was heaven-defying or not. It only knew that if the Khanate Sword Dao was established, it would be strengthened. The primordial world would also be strengthened. Anything that was beneficial to the primordial world, whether good or evil, would be protected by the origin of heaven and earth. Therefore, when it saw that the way of heaven wanted to destroy the Khanate Sword Dao, it could not help but attack. It descended into the world and destroyed the divine punishment. Chapter 223. However, although the divine punishment dissipated, it did not disappear. It existed in another form. In the void, dark clouds rolled and thunder rumbled. There seemed to be divine halls, immortal palaces, pagoda, heavenly soldiers, and giant deities beating drums in the sky. All kinds of strange phenomena appeared one by one. Gradually, a vast world was formed in the sky. It was magnificent and colorful. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the world. Feng Zichen was very familiar with this world. Its appearance and aura were exactly the same as the Nine-Cloud Heavenly Realm, which evolved from the Nine-Cloud Thunder territory in the Thunder Lock. In the future, the Nine-Cloud Heavenly Realm was the headquarters of the Thunder Department, where the primitive thunderbolts were operated. Its power was not only to control the clouds and rain, but also to control the disasters and blessings of heaven. It could control the balance of things and people. It could control life and death. It had the power to send the tribulation on behalf of heaven. Its appearance meant that the heavenly punishment had silently changed into a slightly weaker heavenly tribulation. Different from the divine punishment, the tribulation was the test of the way of heaven for everything in the primitive land. It set different standards according to the strength of the target. It would leave immediately after the fight. As for whether the target was dead or alive, it depended on his own strength. If he passed it, he would live. If he failed, he would die. However, the way of heaven was not as perfect as it was in the future. It had made all kinds of rules. There was no concept of the tribulation in the primitive land. The tribulation was the result of the return of the righteous gods after the apotheosized tribulations and the operation of the order of heaven and earth. Before that, there had never been a tribulation in the primitive land. But now, with the intervention of the origin of heaven and earth, the way of heaven had changed inexplicably and evolved the tribulation in advance. Of course, the tribulation was not as perfect as it was in the future. It only appeared for the things that defied the natural order. From now on, whenever something defied the natural order was born, there would be no more divine punishment. Instead, it would be transformed into a tribulation. It left a glimmer of hope for it to show the virtue of heaven. Tribulation? Interesting. This way may be very promising. The sages were connected with the way of heaven. Therefore, when the way of heaven changed, the 6 sages immediately sensed it. Moreover, he could faintly sense that there was a great opportunity in the heavenly tribulation. Therefore, each and every one of them began to calculate silently in their hearts. No one knew what they were planning. I wonder if this change is good or bad for the Khanate sword Tao? In the North Sea, Feng Zichen said worriedly as he looked at the 81 innate runes below the tribulation clouds. Since the heavenly tribulation was targeted at the Khanate sword Tao, it could only be overcome by itself. If Feng Zichen were to intervene, it would probably cause an unforeseen event. Not only would he not be able to help the innate sword Tao, but he might even lead himself into a calamity. Therefore, the success or failure of this heavenly tribulation depended entirely on the accumulation of the Khanate sword Tao. Boom! The heavenly thunders were raining down from the nine-cloud sky realm, each one more ferocious than the last. Every single one of those dazzling streaks of lightning was thicker and larger than a mountain. When they struck down, they caused the glaciers to shatter and the void to explode. At first, the heavenly tribulation was struck by golden, silver, and purple lightning. In the end, the power became stronger and stronger, carrying all kinds of attributes. Multicolored lightning began to wreak havoc, splitting the heavens. Boom! A streak of 5-colored lightning struck down and turned into 5 streaks of lightning, blasting on the Khanate runes. It was the Khanate godly thunder of 5 elements. In the lightning, the Khanate runes were scattered and dimmed. Khanate Taoist connotation gradually disappeared as if they were going to return to their original state. Because the heavenly tribulation was too terrifying, it was not much weaker than the heavenly punishment. The difference was that the heavenly punishment was endless until it was destroyed. However, the heavenly tribulation was different. It was limited by time and quantity. According to Feng Zichen's calculation, this heavenly tribulation was called the Nine-Cloud Heavenly Tribulation, the first one in the primitive land. It was divided into 9 layers, each with 12 streaks of lightning. There were 108 streaks of lightning in total. In other words, as long as the Khanate sword Tao could withstand the 108 streaks of lightning, it could successfully pass the heavenly tribulation and integrate into the origin of heaven and earth. It would completely become a part of the Khanate sword Tao. Unfortunately, the Khanate sword Tao was only a product of Daluo. Compared to the sage-to-be heavenly tribulation, it was too weak. It could not withstand the first layer of the heavenly tribulation and was showing signs of returning to the Khanate sword Tao. This scene made Feng Zichen extremely anxious, but there was nothing he could do to help. This feeling of not being able to use one's strength was truly depressing. Who is that person in the heavenly punishment? The Pangu aura on his body is so pure. This is another authentic Pangu. Also, he and the Khanate Tao in front of him are extremely unfamiliar. They are existences that have never been heard of. He is establishing a new Khanate Tao. This heavenly punishment is caused by this. However, the condition of his Khanate Tao is not very good. It seems that he is going to fail. The heavenly punishment was replaced by the heavenly tribulation, and the power of the heavenly path that filled the sky above the North Sea also disappeared. This caused the North Sea to return to the attention of the powerful beings. Therefore, everything that happened in the North Sea was clearly displayed in the eyes of the powerful beings. Immediately, there was a wave of shocked voices. Whether it was the authentic Pangu or the new Khanate Tao, they were enough to move them, not to mention the 2 things that happened at the same time. However, among these powerful beings, the 3 saints were the most shocked. They were Tai Qing, Zhuanti, and Nuwa. Others did not know the origin of Feng Zichen. They only thought that he was a part of the Pangu's origin and an innate saint born from it. He had been living in seclusion in the primordial world and had only come out today after he had achieved his Tao. He planned to amaze the world with a single feat. However, the 3 of them had all come into contact with Feng Zichen. How could they not know his origin? His foundation was just a mere postnatal. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would turn from a postnatal life form to a Khanate life form? In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a Khanate saint. Moreover, he was the most authentic Pangu in the primordial world. With the ability of a saint, if he was willing to pay a price and spend a lot of Khanate origin, he could still transform an ordinary postnatal life form into a Khanate god fiend. However, to transform a postnatal life form into an authentic Pangu, not to mention a saint, even the heavenly Tao could not do it personally. It was also impossible to transform a Khanate god fiend into an authentic Pangu. Therefore, how could they not be shocked by such a good fortune that far exceeded their imagination? This child has a great opportunity and a great secret. At this moment, the three saints were curious about Feng Zichen at the same time. They did not know if it was good or bad for him. Seeing that the Khanate sword Tao was about to collapse and turn into an postnatal Tao at any time, the origin of heaven and earth could not help but make a move. Rumble. Above the North Sea, Tao sounds resounded and heavenly flowers fell. Accompanied by these sacred phenomena, 10,000 Tao appeared and hung down boundless Tao runes, enveloping the Khanate sword talisman. Chapter 224. In an instant, the Khanate rune shone again and the Khanate Taoist rhyme around it became more profound. Purple chi rose and filled the air with an ancient aura. A powerful aura burst out from the Khanate rune, carrying with it a supreme sword will. It swept across all directions and wiped out all the lightning around it. The first lightning tribulation was over. Boom! As soon as the first lightning tribulation was over, the second lightning tribulation fell impatiently. 12 heavenly thunderbolts struck at the Khanate rune in an overwhelming manner. Buzz! The Khanate rune was not afraid. It trembled slightly and suddenly condensed in the air, turning into the sword Tao again. It exuded a supreme sword will and attacked the heavenly thunderbolts. During this process, the chaos Tao did not retreat. It still hung down endless Khanate Taoist rhyme, shrouding the sword Tao and constantly increasing its power. Rustle. The sword Tao weaved back and forth in the heavenly thunderbolts. The sword body flashed with a cold light and a sharp sword light shot out, destroying all the lightning around it and turning it into the purest Khanate Taoist rhyme. As the sword body moved, the Khanate Taoist rhyme transformed from the heavenly thunderbolts immediately rushed toward the sword Tao and merged into its body, strengthening its origin. Whoosh! After gaining the benefits, the sword Tao first shook like a human, then pointed the tip of the sword to the sky and suddenly accelerated, rushing directly into the 9 heavens lightning tribulation. However, the Khanate Taoist rhyme contained in the second lightning tribulation could not satisfy it. Therefore, under its instinctive desire, the sword Tao rushed in without waiting for the third lightning tribulation to fall. Rumble. Endless sword light gushed out from the sword Tao, carrying all kinds of power. In the blink of an eye, it covered the second and third lightning tribulations, piercing thousands of holes. Then, all kinds of power erupted. There was the surging of earth, fire, water and wind, the endless cycle of the 5 elements, yin and yang, all kinds of Taoist rhyme were in it. The second and third lightning tribulations were completely broken into pieces, turning into Khanate Taoist rhyme that filled the sky and was devoured by the sword Tao. This was Feng Zichen's self-created sword Tao remarkable power, the beginning of the sword, the unification of all Taoist rhyme. In this way, the second and third lightning tribulations were over. It was as if shattering 2 layers of lightning tribulations at once had given the sword Tao a boost of confidence. Its confidence, without hesitation, it rushed into the 4th lightning tribulation. However, the 9 heavens lightning tribulation changed. Every 3 lightning tribulations, its power would increase. If the power of the first 3 levels of the thunder calamity was equivalent to that of a demi-saint who had killed 1 corpse, then the demi-saint would be very powerful. Then, the power of the middle 3 levels of thunder trial was equivalent to that of a pre-saint who had killed 2 corpses. The power of the last 3 levels of thunder trial was equivalent to that of a pre-saint who had killed 3 corpses. If a sword of sword Tao were to enter recklessly, how could it end well? Boom! Lightning struck down, causing the heavens to fall and the earth to split. Ghosts and deities cried out, as if the world was furious. It was incomparably terrifying, erupting with endless lightning that was deafening. It was a vast expanse. Nothing could be seen except for the heavenly tribulation. Buzz, the sword of swordsmanship trembled slightly. It had already climbed to the highest peak that it could currently reach. Innate Taoist rhymes filled the air and sublimated to the extreme, as if it was about to merge with heaven and earth. It heavens and rill. It. Eternal. It. Clang. When the huge heavenly lightning struck its body, sparks flew in all directions. It was as if iron was being hammered, and the sound was ear-piercing. At the same time, when the heavenly lightning tribulation struck the sword Tao, some of the Taoist rhymes around it merged into its body and strengthened the sword talisman. At this moment it was as if heaven and earth were the furnace, yin and yang were the fire, lightning was the hammer, Taoist rhymes were the materials, and the heavenly Tao was the craftsman. It gathered all kinds of incredible power to temper the connate sword Tao. Clang, 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 another series of thunderous booms could be heard as dense lightning bolts struck on the innate sword Tao's body one after another. It was as if a giant hammer was hammering on iron, causing sparks to fly in all directions. It was simply too shocking. The lightning bolts were like heavy hammers that kept tempering the connate sword Tao. They pressed Taoist rhymes into its body and strengthened its essence, making it stronger and stronger. In the end, the sword Tao dispersed and turned into 81 connate runes. They floated in the lightning tribulation and emitted colorful lights. It illuminated the void around it. Connate Taoist rhymes filled the air, purple chi rose, and a rain of light fell. When the lightning tribulation in the middle three levels could no longer help it, the connate sword Tao erupted. The sword Tao reappeared and released a dazzling sword light. Rumble. Essence, chi, and spirit appeared, water, fire, and wind surged, and the sun, moon, and stars shone brightly. The three treasures of heaven, earth, and man appeared together, triggering the power of the three, disrupting all order and destroying all existence, shattering the three levels of lightning tribulation. Just like that, the fourth, fifth, and sixth levels of lightning tribulation were passed. After being provoked one after another, the heavenly tribulation was completely enraged. Above, a sea of lightning rolled and surged. Now, it was completely rioting and poured down like an ocean. It was comparable to the power of the three-corpse quasi-saint. However, the connate sword Tao was not afraid because it was too powerful at this moment. Half of its foot was merging with heaven and earth. Its essence was sublimating and surpassing itself. It was undergoing a transformation. Therefore, it was unprecedentedly powerful. Boom! Lightning erupted and pierced through the void, causing this place to shatter into pieces. Vast and mighty sword light rose from the sword Tao. It was dazzling like the sun, illuminating the universe, releasing billions of rays of light. Every ray of light was a divine ability that contained sword intent. However, at this moment, the heavenly lightning raged and the endless sea of lightning smashed down, drowning the connate sword Tao. The power of the last three levels of heavenly tribulation was too powerful. The sword Tao was within it, but it was dispersed in just a moment. It turned into connate runes and struggled in the sea of lightning. The light around it dimmed and was about to shatter. The void trembled as the power of the primordial Tao surged over. Connate Taoist rhymes filled the air, forcefully condensing the connate sword Tao and reforming it in the lightning. Every connate rune contained lightning and was fully tempered. Although it was dim, once it endured, it was destined to reach a higher level, become stronger, and be more compatible with heaven and earth. Bang! At this moment, the heavenly tribulation had reached the end, and the most terrifying thing happened. The last three levels of heavenly tribulation began to merge, turning into a supreme God's shadow. Behind it, heavenly tribulation rolled and lightning lingered. His face was blurry and could not be seen clearly. Only a pair of purple divine eyes with a terrifying light could be seen clearly. Those were the divine eyes formed by the power of heavenly punishment. They contained the aura of destruction and had the unique power of heavenly punishment. After all, it was a heavenly tribulation evolved from heavenly punishment. Moreover, it was the first time it had appeared, so it was inevitable that it would be imperfect and carry a trace of heavenly punishment's shadow. Now, the furious heavenly tribulation evolved the power of heavenly punishment from this trace of shadow and blasted towards the connate sword Tao. Chapter 225. In order to allow the connate sword Tao to be born, the origin of heaven and earth did not hesitate to cheat it. It increased its power one after another, causing it to not be damaged in the heavenly tribulation. Instead, it became stronger and stronger. It was about to pass the 9 heavens of thunder tribulation and be completely born in the world. At this moment, the heavenly Tao could not help but make a move. As a selfless existence, the heavenly Tao could no longer tolerate the origin of heaven and earth. It kept cheating the Khanate sword Tao and breaking the fairness. Therefore, it secretly strengthened the strength of the heavenly tribulation and evolved a trace of the power of heavenly punishment, returning the situation to the level that it thought was the fairest. Chi! A purple light flew out from the eyes of the emperor, carrying the power of heavenly punishment. It destroyed the void and shattered the great Tao. In the blink of an eye, it came to the side of the Khanate sword Tao and shattered the sword body that it had just reassembled. It was the 9 heavens tribulation light. It gathered billions of thunderbolts and merged many tribulations into the Khanate divine light. It contained the power of yin and yang and had the power to command all kinds of tribulations. It could create and destroy all things. It was the supreme achievement of the Khanate Thunder Tao. It was also the foundation of the heavenly Tao to command all things and punish all things. It was one of the strongest offensive methods of the heavenly Tao. Rumble. Terrifying power raged, as if the universe was collapsing and the great Tao was collapsing. It was a scene of the end of the world. Even with the help of 10,000 Tao runes, the Khanate sword Tao was still struggling crazily in the tribulation light. It was difficult to reassemble the sword body. The brilliance around it was dimming, and the Khanate Tao runes were fading. At this moment, it was not degenerating into the post-celestial sword Tao, but was truly shattering. The power of the 9 heavens tribulation light was far beyond Feng Zichen's imagination. It was extremely powerful. It directly destroyed the Khanate sword Tao, wanting to make it completely disappear from the primitive world and erase all traces of its existence. At this moment, Feng Zichen was really panicking. The Khanate sword Tao contained his blood and sweat, and it was related to his future path. If it was destroyed just like that, his loss would be great. The more anxious he was, the more Feng Zichen calmed down. Countless ideas flashed through his mind, and sparks of wisdom burst forth. In an instant, he thought of a feasible method. First, Feng Zichen secretly mobilized the power of the Tree of World and temporarily raised his strength to the Sage-to-be level. Then he shouted into the void. Fellow Taoists, if the Khanate sword Tao is completed, boundless fortune will gather and boundless merit will descend. Therefore, today, Zichen shamelessly asks for the help of all sword cultivators to establish the Khanate sword Tao in the untainted land. We will pave the way for all living beings and create a prosperous era of sword Tao. I hope that the sword cultivators of the wilderness can lend a hand to the Khanate sword Tao and overcome the heavenly tribulation. The voice was loud and resounded throughout the untainted land. Every living creature heard it clearly, and they all looked in the direction of the North Sea. There were many experts who used swords in the primordial world. In fact, there were many of them. They might not have the concept of swordsmanship in their hearts, but after using the sword for a long time, they would more or less have their own understanding of the sword in their hands. And these insights were the foundation of the Khanate sword Tao, the nutrients for its growth. If he could absorb all of these insights, his Khanate sword Tao would definitely be able to take another step forward and become even more perfected. At that time, the 9 heavens thunder tribulation would be nothing. Gather the wisdom of all the sword cultivators in the primordial world and add bricks and tiles to the Khanate sword Tao. They would constantly perfect it and break through the heavenly tribulation in one fell swoop. That was the idea that Feng Zichen had thought of. How could he make the Khanate sword Tao perfect with his own strength? Only by gathering the strength of everyone could it be completely perfected and stand in the primordial world. After all, the Khanate sword Tao was not Feng Zichen's Tao alone, but the Tao of all living beings in the primordial world. If this Tao was completed, he would not be the only one who would benefit. All living beings in the primordial world would benefit at the same time. Sure enough, as Feng Zichen finished speaking, sword intent rose from the primordial world, bringing with it countless insights of the sword Tao, and surged into the Khanate sword Tao. That was all the insights that the experts of the primordial world had about their own swords. Although the Khanate Dao that these experts had attained was not the Khanate Sword Dao, what had accompanied them as they grew and protected their Dao bodies was the sword in their hands. They used the sword as a weapon to kill strong enemies and protect the great Dao, walking to the peak step by step. Although they could not reach the point of treating the sword as their life, they still had a different kind of feelings. Now, someone had stepped forward and created the Khanate Sword Dao out of nothing in the primordial world. For the countless sword cultivators of the primordial world, they had gathered boundless luck and opened the door to heaven. This was a major event that would benefit countless sword cultivators and themselves. As a member of the sword cultivators, how could they stay out of it? How could they not step forward? Therefore, they moved. They raised the sword in their hands, poured their insights into the sword, and slashed in the direction of the North Sea. That sword was dazzling, and its brilliance spread throughout the vast universe. That sword contained their desire for the Khanate Sword Dao and their determination to establish the Khanate Sword Dao. Rumble. The resplendent sword light carried an unparalleled force as it brazenly slashed into the light of tribulation, destroying the light of tribulation that enveloped the Khanate Sword Dao. Immediately, the surrounding void was cleared. Then, the resplendent sword light dispersed with a bang, turning into billions of strands of Khanate light that merged with the Khanate Sword Dao. Buzz, 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 after a violent tremor, the Khanate Sword Dao also collapsed into countless Khanate light that scattered in the world. What's going on? Even Feng Zichen did not expect such a sudden change. Why did the Khanate Sword Dao shatter all of a sudden? Just as he was puzzled, the scene changed again. The Khanate light that scattered in the world suddenly condensed again and turned into Khanate runes again. However, at this time, there were no longer 81 Khanate runes, but 240. With the help of countless sword cultivators of the primordial world, the Khanate Sword Dao had evolved further. The Khanate runes that formed its foundation had changed from 81 to 240, making it more complete and closer to the Khanate Dao of the primordial world. At the same time, its power had also increased like never before. Dong! It was as if the entire primordial world was shaking, and a terrifying power was emitted. 240 Khanate runes gathered and turned into a shocking giant sword. Innate Taoist rhymes swirled around the giant sword, releasing a boundless sword will that was vast and mighty. Its body was unbelievably large. Just by lying in the air, it blocked the light and caused the North Sea to fall into darkness. As soon as the giant sword was formed, it rotated with a bang and slashed at the Emperor's shadow in the sky. Crack. As the giant sword slashed across, a huge crack appeared in the void. It stretched for tens of thousands of miles as if it had split the world apart. The entire North Sea could be seen clearly. Inside the void crack, there was darkness. It was the purest darkness. Nothing existed, and it seemed to be able to devour one's soul. It was extremely terrifying. Chapter 226. As the giant sword waved, the terrible black crack kept moving forward. In an instant, it came to the side of the 9 clouds' heavenly tribulation. It was like a giant mouth that wanted to swallow the sky. However, the great Emperor's shadow was the incarnation of the heavenly way. Its strength was unfathomable, far exceeding that of an ordinary sage to be. How could it be afraid of the Khanate Sword Tao? Swoosh! Swoosh! The great Emperor's shadow's purple eyes were flowing with the power of the heavenly way. It emitted 9 rays of tribulation light, which attracted the 9 clouds' thunderbolts and various tribulation chi. It turned into a vast celestial domain, which covered the sky and the sun. It pressed down on the giant sword. Rumble. Terrifying fluctuations came, and the void collapsed. The sky above the North Sea was completely broken. There was nothing left except for the giant sword and the great Emperor's shadow. One had the help of the origin of heaven and earth, and the comprehension of countless sword cultivators, which made it very powerful. The other had the help of the heavenly way, which gathered endless thunderbolts and tribulation chi. It was vast and boundless. The 2 sides were in a stalemate, and neither side could defeat the other. Is it still not working? Looking at the Khanate Sword Tao in a stalemate with the heavenly tribulation, Feng Zichen frowned. Originally, the power of the heavenly tribulation was limited. After the 108 heavenly thunders, its power would be exhausted. The heavenly tribulation would be over. However, the origin of heaven and earth helped the Khanate sword Tao, which made the heavenly way secretly increase the power of the heavenly tribulation. If the Khanate sword Tao wanted to survive the heavenly tribulation, it had to destroy the great emperor's shadow and completely destroy the 9 clouds' heavenly realm. However, looking at the situation above, the Khanate sword Tao and the great emperor's shadow were evenly matched. Neither side could defeat the other, and there was no hope of destroying it. Moreover, the origin of heaven and earth could not be manifested for a long time. If it continued to drag on, it would be extremely unfavorable for the Khanate sword Tao. When the origin of heaven and earth's power disappeared, the Khanate sword Tao would be no match for the great emperor's shadow. It would only be destroyed. At that time, the Khanate sword Tao would disappear completely if it could not survive the heavenly tribulation. Khanate sword Tao? Interesting. He's a great talent. It's a pity that he's not a disciple of the poor way. On Kunlun Mountain, after the Grand Pure One learned about Feng Zichen's background from the Grand Pure One, he could not help but look at him deeply and sigh regretfully. This person's opportunity was truly heaven-defying. If he could enter the sect of Jie School, he would definitely be able to increase the luck of Jie School and overshadow the other 3 sections. Of course, the Prime Clear Sage was not the only one who thought so. At this moment, the 2 saints, Yuqing and Tai Qing, also had the same thought. Not only that, but Feng Zichen, as a Panga descendant, was obviously more suitable to inherit their mantle. Under their guidance, it would not be difficult for him to become the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian in the future. If he could take her as his disciple, there would be many benefits. Unfortunately, the 3 pure ones were not fated to be together. That day, after Daoist Tai Qing became a saint, he wanted to take Feng Zichen as his disciple, but he was rejected. The Grand Pure One was not angry. He only smiled and did not insist. He planned to settle the matter of taking in a disciple in the future. However, he did not expect things to change so quickly. In the blink of an eye, Feng Zichen had become an authentic Panga descendant and a Khanate god fiend. At this time, it would be difficult to take him in as a disciple. How could Nuwa let him go? Sigh. I didn't expect junior sister Nuwa to take advantage of him. The Prime Clear Sage retracted his gaze from Feng Zichen and said enviously. That's right. Nuwa did not do anything. She just stayed in the palace of Empress Hua in peace and obtained an authentic descendant of the Pangu for no reason. How could she not be envious? The human race was created by Nuwa and was innately linked to her. Therefore, no matter what form Feng Zichen transformed into, the connection between him and Nuwa could not be severed. That was because without Nuwa, the human race would not have been born, and Feng Zichen would not have been born. How could the grace of creation be given up just like that? Not to mention, when Feng Zichen was young, he had received Nuwa's teachings through space. On the path of cultivation after that, he had also received help from Nuwa many times and had a great karma with her. In that case, it was even more impossible to cut ties with Nuwa. Logically speaking, if a human wanted to take an outsider as his master, he had to first obtain Nuwa's consent before he could perform the ceremony of taking her as his master and disciple. However, there were many humans and it was not easy to cultivate. If everyone had to obtain Nuwa's consent before taking her as his master. Not to mention whether Nuwa was annoying or not, even if it was delayed and they missed the opportunity to take her as his master, it would also be a lot of trouble. Therefore, this matter of course had never been truly implemented, and Nuwa had never cared. However, if one were to really take it seriously, taking her as his master without Nuwa's consent did not count. Not to mention someone like Feng Zichen who was deeply involved with Nuwa. If he really went to take her as his master without Nuwa's consent, not only would it not count, but he would also owe her a lot of karma. For saints, calamity would not befall them, and karma would not affect them. There were not many things in the world that could threaten them. And karma was one of them. This thing would not cause any harm to their bodies, but it would affect their cultivation and prevent them from improving. This was the most fatal thing for saints. Not being able to advance on the path of Tao was no different from death. Therefore, once saints formed karma with others, they would think of ways to end it so as not to drag down their own cultivation. The two saints, Xuanti and Jiayin, were powerless to end the karma they owed Taoist Red Cloud, but they were also afraid that it would affect their own cultivation. Therefore, when Red Cloud was in danger, they stood aside and watched him die, ending the karma. The saint of the high Tao did not want to own Nuwa karma, which was why he sighed. Of course, even if he was willing to owe her karma, Nuwa might not agree. After sighing, Taoist Shangqing's expression suddenly turned serious. He looked at the Khanate sword Tao above the North Sea and muttered, "Now that the Khanate sword Tao is facing a tribulation, it is in danger." As the master of the celestial slaying sword and holding the Qingping sword as well as several Khanate spiritual swords, poor Wei cannot remain indifferent. "I must lend him a hand." As he spoke, the saint took out the Qingping sword from beside him. Then, he took out the immortal slaying sword, the immortal slaughtering sword, the immortal trapping sword, and the immortal ending sword from the immortal slaying sword formation. The Khanate sword Tao has contributed greatly to the primordial world and is of great use to all living beings. It must be used. Khanate sword intent, go. The saint pointed at the 5 Khanate spiritual swords beside him. Instantly, the 5 swords shone brightly, and Khanate Taoist rhymes circulated around them. Supreme sword intent erupted and rushed into the 9 heavens, shattering the clouds above Mount Kunlun. Chapter 227. The words of the saints were the will of the heavens. They could change the rules of the world and distort the world's understanding. As the prime clear saint's words fell, the heavens and earth reacted. Countless rules manifested, weakening the power of the great emperor's shadow. At the same time, the entire untainted land was shaking. The aura of the innate sword Tao appeared, emitting a strange Tao rhythm. It was as if the innate sword Tao had already appeared in the untainted land. This was the power of a saint. If I want something, the heavens must have it. The moment the prime clear sage uttered the word Xiantian sword Tao, the Xiantian sword Tao would immediately appear in this world. From this, one could see the might of a sage. Boom! 5 streaks of sword light rose from Mount Kunlun, shaking the heavens and earth. They shattered the endless void and directly arrived above the North Sea, tearing the emperor's shadow into pieces. They were the immortal exterminating 4 swords and the Qingping sword, bringing with them the insights of the sword Tao of the prime clear sage. Even a trace of the sword will of a saint had the power to destroy the world, let alone the sword will of a lifetime. Even the emperor's shadow was no match for him. Fellow Taoists, poor Wei has already made her move. The rest is up to you. Don't let outsiders look down on us sword cultivators. The prime clear sage suddenly said after keeping the 5 great innate godly swords. Previously, only some Daluo Jinxian had helped. The quasi-saints had yet to make a move. Now that the prime clear sage had taken the lead and made his move, it was their turn. Haha. How can I not have a share in the success of the Khanate sword Tao? Within the Lingxiao Hall, Di Jun laughed out loud when he heard the voice of the Shangqing saint. He waved the sun god's sword in his hand and slashed towards the 9 heavens' heavenly tribulation. It was the king's sword, the emperor's sword, and the emperor's sword. It was the sword of the Lord of heaven and earth. It was the sword that commanded the universe. The sword light was so resplendent that even the light of the sun was overshadowed, completely losing its color. His imposing aura suppressed the world, and it terrified the myriad of living beings in the world. It caused all living beings to arouse the desire to submit, and they couldn't help but bow down in worship. In the Blood Sea, Taoist Mingi didn't care about his injuries as he activated the Yuan Tu and Avici swords. Suddenly, a blood-red light exploded, stirring up boundless murderous intent. It swept across the wilderness and shot towards the North Sea. Their attack seemed to be a sign. Behind them, 13 Presaint Grand Cultivators appeared and unleashed supreme sword wills that surged toward the Khanate sword Tao. With this help, the innate sword Tao changed again. The 108 innate runes shattered, and when they gathered again, there were 365 innate runes, which was exactly the number of heavenly cycles. Boom! The reassembled Khanate sword Tao merely shook slightly, and an unparalleled power erupted, sweeping through the void and destroying the heavenly tribulation. Just like that, the 9 heavens tribulation was past. Innate sword Tao. Crack. The Khanate sword Tao continued to vibrate, breaking through the boundless void and arriving at the origin of heaven and earth. It completely merged with it and became the cornerstone of the primordial world. In the next moment, an indescribable sword slowly appeared in the center of the sky. It was so beautiful, so grand, and so dazzling. It was as if all the words of praise in the world could be found on him, so that the entire primordial world could be clearly seen. He was infinitely close to perfection. Rumble. The great Tao was rumbling, and the universe was shaking. Thousands of Taos manifested and Dharma laws descended. Boundless innate Taoist rhymes fell and covered the entire untainted land. Slowly, an illusory figure appeared in the center of the myriad Taos. His purple robe fluttered in the wind, making him look extraordinary. His entire body emitted a distant and ancient aura. That was the aura of the first living being in the world. It belonged to the oldest and most powerful living being in the primordial world, Hong Jun. At that moment, Hong Jun, the heavenly Tao, descended. The birth of the Khanate sword Tao was a major event that shook the primordial world. It could strengthen the origin of the primordial world and promote the evolution of the primordial world. Its influence was endless and far-reaching, enough to change everything in the future. It had immeasurable merit in the primordial world. Therefore, the heavenly Tao descended to personally award Feng Zichen. At that moment, there were no auspicious clouds in the sky, no auspicious aura descending, no heavenly flowers falling, and no golden lotuses growing on the ground. No sacred phenomenon appeared. That was because there was no need for it. The appearance of the phenomenon was to set off the extraordinariness of the event. It was glory and represented the recognition of heaven and earth. What phenomenon could compare to the descent of the heavenly Tao? It could show more glory and represent the recognition of heaven and earth. After the descent of the heavenly Tao, any more phenomena would seem superfluous. You, Panga Zichen clan. You created the Khanate sword Tao and have done great deeds since ancient times. You have immeasurable merit. From now on, you are the sword ancestor. You can enjoy the destiny of heaven and earth and receive the worship of all living beings. I grant you permission to exist with the heavens and the Tao. A cold and emotionless voice that was filled with endless majesty came from the mouth of the heavenly Tao Hong Jun. It contained endless Tao intent and entered the ears of every living being in the primordial world. Living with the heavens and coexisting with the Tao. Speaking of which, any Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal could do that. However, that sentence had a different meaning when it came from the mouth of the heavenly Tao. To Daluo Jingxian, the heavens that existed with the heavens referred to the primordial world. The Tao that existed with the Tao referred to the Tao that one had proven. If they died, they could only rely on the Tao that they had proven to slowly accumulate strength and wait for the day of resurrection. However, Feng Zichen had received the promise of the heavenly Tao, so he had a different treatment. To exist with the Tao referred to no longer his own Tao, but the heavenly Tao. If he were to fall, the heavenly Tao would personally resurrect him. With the power of the heavenly Tao, it would be easy to revive a Daluo Jingxian. It would take at least 10,000 years or at most a Yuanhui to make him reappear in the world. That was equivalent to being immortal. It was the treatment of a saint. The great mystical abilities of the primordial world, who had been paying attention to the commotion, could not help but be moved when they saw that scene. That was a treatment that they could not enjoy. It won't be long before the primordial world has another top-notch great mystical ability. A strong thought appeared in the hearts of the great mystical abilities and could not be dismissed. With the care of the heavenly Tao, it was only a matter of time for Feng Zichen to become a great mystical ability. Ever since the Tao ancestor preached the Tao in the Purple Cloud Palace, the great mystical abilities that were born in the primordial world were all disciples of the Tao ancestor. They did not expect that after countless years, the primordial world would welcome a great mystical ability who was not from the Purple Cloud Palace. The primordial world had really changed. For a moment, the great mystical abilities were silent. At the same time, Feng Zichen's appearance gradually appeared in the hearts of all the spirits. Sword Ancestor. Sword Ancestor. Sword Ancestor. In the next moment, almost spontaneously, every creature could not help but shout the two words, Sword Ancestor. Their voices were loud and in unison, and they carried endless power of will as they poured it into Feng Zichen's body. The human Tao was all spirits. The power of all spirits was the power of the human Tao. Chapter 228. As the power of humanity entered his body, Feng Zichen's body underwent a miraculous change. His essence, energy, and spirit were constantly jumping, entangling with the power of humanity that surged into his body, deducing all kinds of mysteries. Among them, Feng Zichen's essence was the most active, and its connection with the power of humanity was the closest, gradually merging with it. Then, his essence completely merged with the power of humanity that surged over, becoming incomparably powerful and magical. The mighty power of humanity flowed, emitting a perfect aura. In the end, this essence suddenly jumped out of his body and hung above his head, giving birth to a flower. That flower was a Tao flower. It seemed to be colorless, but also seemed to have countless colors. The flower bloomed 12th grade, and the innate Tao runes around it were as deep as the sea. The light of humanity flickered, sparkling. This was the flower of essence, the flower of man. Daluo Jinxian's cultivation was the great Tao, and what he cultivated was essence, energy, and spirit. Only when the essence, energy, and spirit were completely perfected, connecting the three talents of heaven, earth, and man, and blooming the three flowers could one operate the rules of heaven and earth, break free from the shackles of the long river of time and space, and become a sage to be. The blooming of the flower of man indicated that Feng Zichen's essence was completely perfected, and it also indicated that he had officially entered the middle stage of Daluo Jinxian. A vast aura rose from his body and swept in all directions. Compared to before, it was more than several times stronger, even surpassing some experts in the late stage of Daluo Jinxian. The 12th grade of the flower was already the peak of the primitive world. There was no way to improve, and he had the potential of a saint. However, although this flower was extraordinary, there were many who could bloom 12th grade in the primitive world. Apart from the saints, there were at least dozens of people among the 3,000 mortal guests of the Purple Cloud Palace who could do this. Feng Zichen was an authentic Pangu, so it was normal for his flower to bloom 12th grade. However, Feng Zichen's flower of man was different from others. It was the true flower of humanity, containing the mighty power of humanity. Although it was also at the 12th stage of the flower blossom realm, it was connected to the human Tao and not the Tao of three talents. Naturally, it was much stronger than others. It was precisely because of this that Feng Zichen was able to possess power that far exceeded his realm. Before this, Nuwa was the only one in the untainted land who could bear the flower of human Tao. The rest could only bear the ordinary flower of human Tao. Of course, when Nuwa was still in the Daluo Jinxian realm, the Tao flower she bore was also an ordinary human flower. The change happened when he created the human race. The birth of the human race, apart from the Xiantian lifeforms, created the postnatal lifeforms, recreated the Xuanqi of creation, and filled the void of humanity. Naturally, the mighty power of the human Tao would descend and help Nuwa reconstruct her Tao foundation. The flower of human transformation would then become the flower of human Tao. In the realm of Daluo Jinxian, he far surpassed the great mystical abilities of the primordial world. Now, Feng Zichen had established the Xiantian sword Tao and accidentally triggered the resonance of all spirits. As a result, it attracted the mighty power of the human Tao to descend and help him bloom the flower of human Tao. This made him the second existence in the primordial world to bloom such a flower after Nuwa. The flower of human Tao. What a great opportunity! When this flower blooms, it can communicate with the human Tao. Every move will be accompanied by the mighty power of the human Tao. It can also be used to explore the secrets of all spirits and seek the true meaning of the great Tao. It's of great help to improve one's cultivation. It can be said that there are many benefits. This fellow Taoist's opportunity is really enviable. At this time, the great mystical abilities who could remain calm earlier could no longer remain calm. They all looked at Feng Zichen with some envy. One had to know that the human Tao was all living beings in the primordial world. Its power could restrain all living beings and destroy all magic power. More importantly, the power of the human Tao had the ability to create things out of thin air. The so-called unforgettable memory would definitely have an echo. It was the embodiment of the mighty power of the human Tao. The essence of the incense divine path that Feng Zichen created was a use of the power of the human Tao. Wasn't the power of the will of all spirits the same as the power of the human Tao? Rumble. After Feng Zichen advanced, the heavenly Tao Hong Jun made a move. He raised his hand and pointed at Feng Zichen. A purple brilliance surged, attracting all the great Tao in the world and entering his glabella. That purple brilliance was not the purple chi of Hong Meng, but the origin of the heavenly Tao. It was the source of all the great Tao. It was the essence of the primordial world and the strongest power. Pfft! The sound of a flower blooming could be heard. It was the sound of Feng Zichen's flower of God, the flower of heaven blooming. With the help of the heavenly Tao's origin, Feng Zichen's chi of God reached perfection and formed a flower of Tao. The flower of Tao bloomed 12 times. The flower of heaven was surrounded by the power of the heavenly Tao. It was lofty and vast, merging with the sky. It was ethereal as if it could not be touched. This was the flower of heavenly Tao, a flower of Tao that was connected to the heavenly Tao. It was far from comparable to the flower of heaven that was connected to the Tao of 3 talents. In the primordial world, only the Tao ancestor Hong Jun had formed this flower. In the past, the Tao ancestor merged with the Tao and mended the heavenly Tao, perfecting it. Therefore, the power of the heavenly Tao entered his body and mended his Tao foundation. The flower of heavenly Tao bloomed. Feng Zichen absorbed the heavenly Tao's origin and perfected his chi of God. He also bloomed the flower of heavenly Tao. His cultivation improved further and reached the late Daluo Jingxian. His strength was close to the perfected Daluo Jingxian. In this way, Feng Zichen had already bloomed 2 of the 3 flowers. They were the flower of human Tao and the flower of heavenly Tao. He could be said to be the only one in the primordial world, far surpassing the other Daluo Jingxian. When he broke through to the perfected Daluo Jingxian, with the power of the human Tao and the heavenly Tao, no one in the primordial world would be able to compete with him. He could be said to be the first Daluo Jingxian. What? The flower of heavenly Tao? He has already gathered 2 of the 3 Taos of heaven, earth, and man. If he blooms another flower of Tao, I'm afraid he will directly become the great Taoist priests. I didn't expect that creating the Khanate Tao in the primordial world would have such benefits. Maybe we can try and see if we can use this to bloom the flower of heavenly Tao and the flower of human Tao. Seeing this scene, many powerful divines couldn't help but be tempted. They wanted to imitate Feng Zichen's action and create another Khanate Tao for the primordial world. It had been said in the primordial world that the 3 Taos of heaven, earth, and man were the combination of the essence, chi, and spirit of the great Taoist priests Pangu and the will of the primordial world. If someone could bloom the flower of human Tao, the flower of Tao, and the flower of heavenly Tao in succession when he was in the Daluo Jingxian, he would be invincible in the Daluo Jingxian realm and be called the great Taoist priests. The great Taoist priests was the title of Pangu. If the descendants inherited this title, the benefits would be beyond everyone's imagination. Even if they couldn't become a sage, it wouldn't be difficult to set foot in the primordial world of Daluo Jingxian realm. With such a reason, how could those powerful divines not be excited? Their strength was much higher than that of Feng Zichen. It wouldn't be difficult for them to break through the heavenly tribulation. With this thought in mind, the thought of trying in their hearts became even stronger. Chapter 229. In an instant, a brilliant golden light appeared from the void in the vast universe and filled the sky above the wilderness. That was the golden light of merit. At this moment, the golden light of merit descended. Boom! The sky shook, and the boundless golden light of merit suddenly scattered, turning into billions of strands that fell towards the great desolate land. Among them, the largest ball of golden light, which was as much as 30% of the entire merit, flew toward the North Sea and fell into Feng Zichen's body. However, Feng Zichen already had enough merit. Even his merit's spiritual light had already reached the peak of an acquired supreme treasure and could no longer advance. No matter how much merit he had, it could not advance further and become an innate spiritual treasure. Sage to be? With the merit in his body, Feng Zichen had an epiphany. As long as he absorbed the merit, he could directly enter the sage to be realm and become a powerful great divine ability without any future troubles. However, I walk the path of proving my Tao with strength and become the Panga Tao body. Although it's a shortcut to become a sage to be with merit, it's not good for my Tao. Therefore, I won't take it. To prove one's Tao with strength, one had to press forward and advance bravely. Once one chose a shortcut, it would be like walking on the wrong path. It would affect one's belief in invincibility and gradually deviate from the right path. There were thousands of ways to prove one's Tao in the world, but the weakest was to prove one's Tao with merit and the strongest was to prove one's Tao with strength. Therefore, Feng Zichen already had an answer in his heart about how to choose. Moreover, Feng Zichen also had a vague ambition. He wanted to bloom the flower of earth. Soon, Hudu would open up the reincarnation cycle. At that time, the earth would descend, and he could take this opportunity to use the power of the earth to form the flower of earth. If he became a sage to be now, the flower of earth would only be the flower of earth, which was far from the flower of earth. Moreover, it would be a blessing to use the power of the earth to form the flower of earth. He also dreamed of using the earth to repair his Tao foundation and forcefully form the flower of earth like Hudu. However, it was absolutely impossible. Having made his decision, Feng Zichen immediately took action. The merit that surged into his body gushed out of his body again. It floated behind his head, forming a golden auspicious cloud. It had a radius of 100 million miles, and golden light shone brilliantly, illuminating the surroundings. It was incomparably holy, and ghosts and gods avoided it. On the other side, 3 balls of golden light landed and flew towards Kunlun Mountain, the heavenly courts, and the blood sea. Each of them had 1 level of sword Tao merit. After that, 2 more layers of merit spread out and entered the bodies of the 13 demi-saints. The last 2 layers of swordsmanship merit were completely shattered and fell to various places in the untainted land. They were divided equally among the Daluo Jinxian. With that, the sword Tao merit distribution was completed. When the Khanate sword principle completely merged with the origin of heaven and earth, all the sword-type Dharma treasures in the untainted land sensed it. Tao patterns appeared on their bodies, and their power increased by 30%. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, in the next moment, all the innate divine swords in the primordial world rose into the sky and floated in the air, trembling continuously to express their excitement. There was finally sword Tao in the untainted land. Even the 4 immortal slaying swords, the Sun God's sword, and the Yuan-Tu Avicii twin swords were no exception. Rumble. At the same time, the entire untainted land was shaking. The great Tao rumbled continuously, and the rules trembled together. The Khanate chi skyrocketed, and the void became more stable. This was the origin of heaven and earth becoming denser. It reflected on the entire untainted land, making the world stronger. Moreover, this change could not be completed in a short period of time. It was believed that in the next tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, the cultivation environment in the untainted land would become better and better. This was the merit of Feng Zichen and the countless sword cultivators in the untainted land. As expected, during this period of time, their luck would rise all the way. They would act as if the heavens were helping them, and their cultivation would improve by leaps and bounds. After the appearance of the 10,000 swords, Heavenly Tao Hongjun opened his hand and suddenly grabbed at the void. At this moment, the world became still and completely lost its sound. After a while, the world returned to normal, and a scroll appeared in Heavenly Tao Hongjun's hand, emitting supreme sword intent. When the Khanate sword Tao was just born, there was no item to suppress luck. I'll give you this sword diagram to suppress the luck of the sword Tao. Heavenly Tao Hongjun said as he threw the sword diagram in his hand to Feng Zichen. Swords were murderous weapons. However, no matter how extraordinary a weapon was, it could not suppress one's luck or absorb merit. It was a weapon that was a Khanate spirit treasure or Khanate supreme treasure. Otherwise, Feng Zichen would integrate the merit of the sword Dao into Zichen's sword to improve its grade. The 10,000 sword diagram was a supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasure. It had 45 Khanate divine restrictions that could suppress luck. It was second only to Khanate cardinal treasures. This diagram could also be called the Untainted Land Sword Record. It recorded all the famous swords, sword intents, and even all the experts of the sword Dao in the Untainted Land. In the future, if someone achieved the heaven immortal realm with the Khanate sword Dao, or if a peerless sword was born, or if a supreme sword intent was born, they would automatically appear in the 10,000 sword diagram. Only Feng Zichen could see them. Moreover, there were countless sword intents in the 10,000 sword diagram, which contained the insights of countless sword cultivators. With this diagram in hand, it would be difficult for one's sword Dao cultivation to not improve. Of course, the sword Dao was famous for its strong offensive power. As a sword Dao treasure, the 10,000 sword diagram's function was not as simple as auxiliary. It was also an offensive treasure. With a shake of the sword diagram, hundreds of millions of sword chi were released, sweeping through the untainted land, shattering the universe and shaking the universe. It was extremely powerful. Thank you, Heavenly Dao. After putting away the sword diagram, Feng Zichen bowed to Heavenly Dao and said, "Thou hast made great contributions to the untainted land. In the future, thou shalt have the supreme Dao." Nodding to Feng Zichen, Heavenly Dao Hongjun promised him. Then, Heavenly Dao Hongjuan's figure slowly disappeared and returned to the Heavenly Dao space. "Farewell, Heavenly Dao." Hearing this, Feng Zichen could not help but be overjoyed. In the future, if one died, there would be no future. Since the Heavenly Dao had promised to give him the Supreme Dao in the future, it meant that he would not be in danger of dying before he obtained the Supreme Dao. This was better than any benefit. With the disappearance of Heavenly Dao Hongjun, the North Sea gradually regained its calmness. It was as white as snow. Only Feng Zichen stood above the void. He was wearing a feather robe and a star crown. He looked handsome, and his feather robe fluttered in the breeze. He looked refined. His figure was as tall as heaven and earth. He was simple and unadorned, and he was like a peerless divine sword. He showed his sharpness, and his aura pierced through the 9 layers of clouds. He was extremely extraordinary. At this moment, Feng Zichen attracted the attention of the entire untainted land. His body seemed to be covered with a layer of colorful clouds. There were all kinds of innate divine light flowing, making him look endless and majestic. He was the sword ancestor of the untainted land, the authentic Pangu. He was the only one in the untainted land who could bloom the flower of heavenly Dao and the flower of earth. At this moment, Feng Zichen was extremely brilliant. Even the glory of the saint was overshadowed by him. Chapter 230. Raising his head to look at the sky, Feng Zichen had a feeling. As long as he wanted, he could imprint the path of stars that he had cultivated in the great chaos of the outer realm on the origin of heaven and earth at any time. It would connect with the path of stars of the primordial world and undergo a second enlightenment. The path of stars was within reach for him. However, every time Feng Zichen wanted to put this idea into practice, Lin Mengya's eyes lit up. A great sense of fear would rise in his heart. It was as if there was a certain death crisis waiting for him in the path of stars. Feng Zichen understood that it was Donghuang Tai and Di Jun. Their imprints were in the path of stars. Anyone who wanted to attain the path of stars would be attacked by the Donghuang Bell with all their might. Zhouxing was the foundation of the demon race. Tai and Di Jun would not allow outsiders to touch them. On the Emperor Star, every time Feng Zichen looked at the path of stars, he could see 2 terrifying figures firmly suppressing the path of stars. If the demon race is not eliminated, I know, anyone in the primordial world will never have the chance to attain the path of stars without Di Jun's permission. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, whether it was from the perspective of his race or his own orthodoxy, the demon race was Feng Zichen's greatest enemy and the biggest obstacle on his path to attaining the path. Fortunately, during the trip to the ultimate, Feng Zichen had obtained a shocking opportunity and was able to attain the path in the great chaos of the outer realm. He had bypassed Tai and Di Jun and cultivated the path of stars, Daluo Jinxian. Otherwise, in the primordial world, he would have either attained other Khanate paths or been killed by the Donghuang Bell when he attained the path of stars. There was no chance of luck. Poor Wei Zenyuanzi, Kunpeng, greets fellow Daoist Zichen. While Feng Zichen was deep in thought, Zenyuanzi and Kunpeng rushed over when they saw the power of the path of heaven dissipate. Zichen greets the two of you. If it was in the past, Feng Zichen wouldn't have dared to address these two as fellow Taoists. He could only consider himself as a junior. But now, it was different. Not to mention his identity as the authentic Pangu, just his identity as the ancestor of the Sword Dao was not something that he could easily lower his head to. If Feng Zichen were to bow down to someone, wouldn't that mean that his innate Sword Dao was inferior to his opponent? Therefore, unless it was someone who was absolutely close to him, even if it was a saint, he could still call them fellow Daoist. Fellow Daoist, in the primordial world, you created something out of nothing and created the Khanate Sword Dao. It benefited all living beings and strengthened the essence of the world. There will be immeasurable merit. His ability far surpasses mine. This poor Wei truly admires him. Zenyuanzi bowed to Feng Zichen and praised. Fellow Daoist, you flatter me. Compared to you, what Zichen has done is nothing. Fellow Daoist, you lived alone at the junction of the East and the West and blocked the barren aura of the West with your own strength. You made it impossible for the East to get close to the East, so that the East would not follow in the footsteps of the West and create the prosperity of the East today. This is a move that benefits all living beings in the primordial world. Only in this way can it be called a great merit. If it weren't for you, how could Zichen be as powerful as he is today? Shaking his head with a smile, Feng Zichen said. Feng Zichen was still very respectful to Zenyuanzi. After all living beings in the East were born with his protection. Fellow Daoist, you are a little modest. There are many experts who use swords in the primordial world. Fellow Daoists Shangqing, Di Jun, and Mingyi are the best among them. They have been cultivating for countless years, but they never thought that you could think of and do what we can't do by establishing a Khanate Dao with the sword in your hand. Just based on this point, you are far better than us. Without waiting for Zenyuanzi to reply, Kunpeng said from the side. Fellow Daoist Kunpeng created the demon language, recorded the history of the demon race, and passed down the order of the demon race. It made the inheritance of the demon race orderly, had a history to follow, and continued to grow. Zichen is also very impressed. Feng Zichen replied after bowing to Kunpeng. No matter what the character of Patriarch Kunpeng was, his wisdom was indeed admirable. Before him, there were only Khanate divine runes in the primordial world. There were no other words. It was he, Kunpeng, who created the demon language in the Demon Master Hall. This was the first language born in the primordial world. It shocked the world and made ghosts and gods cry. That was how Kunpeng's position as the demon master came from. Moreover, the later shaman language, as well as the Dao language created by Feng Zichen, and the various words of the later generations were all inspired and created by Kunpeng. His act of creating the demon language had a far-reaching impact, and others could not help but admire him. Just like that, the three of them flattered each other for a while. In these days, who could stand out from a group of Khanate god fiends and become the top great divine ability of the primordial world? Which one of them did not do things of great merit that affected the primordial world for countless years? Otherwise, with so many Khanate god fiends and everyone's aptitude was about the same, why could they stand at the peak of the primordial world while others could not? It could be said that there was no great merit to accompany you, unless you could prove your Dao with strength. Otherwise, no matter how hard you worked, no matter how amazing you were, Daluo Jinxian would be your limit. There was no possibility of you becoming a sage to be. Because the heavenly Dao did not allow it. This was also the reason why the sage to be disappeared in the later generations, and Daluo Jinxian was the peak. Things of great merit had long been done by people in the primordial age, the ancient age. Countless years ago. The later generations no longer had any merit to do, so they naturally could not become sage to be. In the long run, the sage-to-be did not appear in the world for a long time. Wouldn't the primordial world be Daoyuo Jinxian's world? Fellow Daoist, it's a pity for you to stay at the East Sea with your status. Why don't you join the heavenly court and build a great cause so that you can live up to your abilities? When you created the Khanate sword Dao, His Majesty also helped you. I think His Majesty will be very happy for you to join. Now, there are still a few lords of the 9 heavens. If you go to the heavenly court, you will have a bright future. After a while, Daoist Kunpeng suddenly suggested to Feng Zichen. His words were full of temptation, as if he could get the position of Lord of the Heavens if he went to the heavenly court. However, Feng Zichen could not wait to hide from Dong Huang Tai and Di Jun. Why would he take the initiative to go to the heavenly court and wander around under their eyes? Just as he was about to refuse, Feng Zichen heard Zhen Yuanzi beside him persuade him. Fellow Daoist, you must not. The heavenly court is a place where karma is entangled. How can it be a place where cultivators of our generation live for a long time? You are the orthodox Pangu, the primordial sword ancestor. It is easy for you to achieve the great Tao. Why do you have to go to a quagmire like the heavenly court and get dirty? As he spoke, Zhen Yuanzi turned his head and shouted at Kunpeng. Kunpeng scoundrel, what are your intentions for dragging fellow Daoist Zichen into the heavenly court? The heavenly court was where the world operated. Naturally, it had endless creation. It was the easiest to obtain merit from this place. However, because of the importance of the heavenly court, there was also endless karma gathered here. If one was not careful, they would be entangled with karma and be doomed eternally. That was also the reason why there were countless great mystical abilities in the primordial world, but few people joined the heavenly court. He was really afraid. Before he could get any benefits, he would be tainted with karma, causing his cultivation to be unable to improve. When the Great Tribulation broke out, he would die. Hundreds of millions of years of cultivation would turn into flowing water. Only those Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals who could not gather enough merit to become sage-to-be would join the Celestial Court when they had no other choice and slowly accumulate merit. At that moment, Feng Zichen did not lack merit and luck. He was only short of time to become a great mystical ability. Chapter 231. If he were to join the heavenly court now, it would be the greatest disadvantage for Feng Zichen. Kunpeng invited him to join the heavenly court. Regardless of whether his intention was good or bad, the future caused by it was bound to be bad. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. Zhen Yuanzi's character was not bad since he could become good friends with Taoist Red Cloud, who was known as a good man. However, compared to Taoist Red Cloud, he knew when to advance and when to retreat. Therefore, Zhen Yuanzi, who had such a character, was afraid that Feng Zichen would be deceived by Kunpeng after hearing Taoist Kunpeng's words. Zhen Yuanzi, you've gone too far. The heavenly court is not something you can talk nonsense about. As one of the leaders of the heavenly court, Zhen Yuanzi spoke ill of the heavenly court in front of him. If Kunpeng did not say anything, people would look down on the heavenly court when this matter spread. Immediately, Kunpeng was angry and said to Zhen Yuanzi angrily, Zhen Yuanzi, you came to the North Sea to cause trouble for no reason. The Poor Way respects you as the ancestor of the Earth Immortals and has made great contributions to the East, so he tolerates you. I didn't expect that not only do you not know how to restrain yourself, but you also dare to slander the heavenly court in front of the Poor Way. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? You have to know. This is the North Underworld, the Demon Master Palace. And not the fifth manor of Longevity Mountain. As he spoke, a palace surrounded by great Tao slowly appeared behind Taoist Kunpeng. There was a strong demon aura permeating the air and enveloping the entire North Sea. This was the Demon Master Palace, the place where Kunpeng created the demon runes. It contained the merit of educating the demon clan and was one of the treasures of the demon clan. The supreme grade Khanate merit spiritual treasure could activate the demon clan's power of destiny, and its power was shocking. Everyone in the untainted land knows about the heavenly court. There is no need for the Poor Way to slander it. Zhen Yuanzi first smiled contemptuously, then his face suddenly turned cold and said to Kunpeng, "'Cause trouble for no reason?" Fellow Taoist, you have a good memory. You forget about my friend Red Cloud. However, even if you can forget, the poor Wei can't. Not to mention that this is the North Sea, even if this is the heavenly court, the poor Wei will still barge in and make you pay the price you deserve to comfort my friend's soul in heaven. A yellow book flew out of Jin Yuanzi's hand and turned into a boundless continent, floating under his feet. Instantly, turbid air gushed out from the ground. It was incomparably thick and heavy, causing the surrounding space to sink by 30%. This was the Earth Book, formed from the membrane of the Great Earth. It contained the power of the Great Earth Source, recording the changes of the Great Earth. It was a natural Great Wasteland map, just like the He Tu and Luo Shu, possessing the support of unmatched luck. With one strike, it was as if the great desolate land had crashed down. It was incomparably terrifying. It was a top-grade innate spiritual treasure, one of the 3 books of heaven, earth, and man. The 2 of them had been fighting in the North Sea for tens of thousands of years. It was only because Feng Zichen's appearance that the world changed, that the 2 of them stopped temporarily. Now, because of the quarrel, their killing intent had been aroused once more, and the anger they'd accumulated earlier had erupted, and they were about to make a move. Fellow Taoists, you can't. What kind of strength do you have? If you fight, it won't be an exaggeration to say that the world will be destroyed. Who knows how many creatures will be affected and lose their lives because of it? They are so innocent. If they suffer such a calamity for nothing, wouldn't it be the fault of the 2 of you? I hope that the 2 of you can be merciful and stop for the time being. At that time, the creatures of the North Sea will definitely be grateful to the 2 of you. Seeing that the situation was at loggerheads, Feng Zichen hurriedly stepped forward to persuade them. Not to mention that there were countless creatures in the North Sea, and many people would die because of the battle between the 2 of them. Feng Zichen was in the middle of the 2 of them. If they fought, with his Daluo Jinxian's cultivation, it would be completely insufficient. If he was careless, he would be in danger of dying. As such, Feng Zichen didn't dare to let them fight. At the very least, they couldn't fight in the North Sea. At the same time, he was cursing in his heart. If the 2 of you really want to fight to the death, the chaos outside the sky is boundless. No matter how fierce the fight there is, no one will care. What's going on in the North Sea? Feng Zichen's words were reasonable, but the 2 of them were furious and didn't listen at all. They each rode their Dharma treasures and were about to attack each other. Rumble. Just as the 2 supreme-grade connate spirit treasures were about to collide, a divine light suddenly descended from the 9 heavens. It was majestic and vast. Although it was called divine light, it was actually more like a boundless galaxy. It hung down and drowned Zenyuanzi and Kuan-Peng, forcibly separating them. Then, in the roar of the great Tao, a brilliant figure walked out of the void and descended into the world. It was Saint Nuwa. Fellow Taoists, please stop. You are all the few great divine powers in the primordial world, people who exist with the Tao. How can you not know that the heavens have the virtue of cherishing life and humans have compassion? Why do you have to fight here and implicate hundreds of millions of creatures and commit endless sins? Even if you are not afraid of karma, you should think about your disciples. Fellow Taoists, they became your disciples in pursuit of the great Tao, in order to transcend fate. When the time comes, don't let the karma affect your disciples, causing them to be unable to improve their cultivation. Then they will become a joke in the primordial world. After Nuwa appeared, she first withdrew the divine powers that shrouded the 2 of them. Then she bowed and persuaded them slowly. You're right, fellow Taoist Nuwa. We were too reckless. After being forcibly separated, Zenyuanzi and Kuan-Peng also calmed down. They tidied their robes and bowed to Nuwa, saying in unison. I didn't expect that poor Wei's momentary mistake would lead to such a big mistake and implicate countless creatures in the North Sea. It's really poor Wei's fault. Looking at the messy North Sea, Zenyuanzi said with some sorrow. Then, he picked up the Earth Book and waved it. Endless turbid earth chi hung down and kept surging above the sea, gradually forming a continent. Poor Wei has nothing. The only thing I can do for the creatures in the North Sea is to open up a blessed land for them to live and reproduce. This blessed land was opened by the Earth Book. Its origin is rich and is not weaker than ordinary blessed lands in the primordial world. Let it be the poor way's compensation. Zenuanzi pointed at the continent and said. The Earth Book was connected to the origin of the primordial world. The blessed land opened by it contained a trace of the origin power of the earth. It was very magical and endless. It could constantly absorb the chi of the earth vein to grow. Only the origin power of the earth could resist the invasion of the connate coldness of the North Sea. Otherwise, with Kuan Peng's means, it would have opened up many blessed lands in the North Sea. It would not have made the current North Sea a glacier without any traces of people. It was because the connate coldness was too strong. No matter how many blessed lands there were in the North Sea, they could not resist its invasion and gradually turned into wastelands and glaciers. Humph. Seeing this, Kuan Peng snorted coldly but did not say anything. He was the actual master of the North Sea. He benefited the most from Zenuanzi's actions. What else could he say? Feng Zichen, who was at the side, was secretly shocked when he saw this scene. In the end, it was because of the difference in strength. The same words, when spoken by people of different strengths, would result in different results. Zenuanzi and Kuan Peng did not even listen to Feng Zichen's words. As soon as Nuwa said that, they immediately stopped and looked regretful. They immediately made up for it. The two of them stopped, and the haze that shrouded the hearts of countless creatures in the North Sea instantly dissipated, allowing them to relax. Then, they saw a piece of land appear out of thin air above the North Sea. The connate chi inside was like clouds and mist, surrounded by the chi of creation. It was extraordinary. Under the display of the heavenly secrets, they immediately understood that the ancestors of the earth immortals could not bear to see the bitter cold of the North Sea and the suffering of hundreds of millions of creatures. They deliberately used their great mystical abilities to open up a connate blessed land for them to live and reproduce. After all, they were the incarnations of the great Tao, the connate god-fiends born by heaven and earth, the children of the world, and the top great mystical abilities of the primordial world. The heavenly Tao had to take care of their dignity and voluntarily concealed the truth of the matter. It beautified the disaster that they had caused because of their personal grudges and turned it into a move that benefited the living beings of the North Sea. It did not mention a word about the slaughter caused by their previous battle. However, the heavenly Tao was fair in the end. Although it did not say it, it would still secretly record it and wait to settle it in the future. To the heavenly Tao, merit was merit, and mistakes were mistakes. It could only weaken the calamity with merit, but it could not offset each other. Otherwise, why would there be such a move of first punishing and then rewarding? Couldn't they just offset each other? Ancestor of the 5 cardinal points is merciful. We will never forget today's kindness. For a moment, the living beings of the North Sea knelt down and kowtowed to the ancestor of the 5 cardinal points. Clearly, they had long forgotten who had caused the calamity of the North Sea. That's right. The moment the heavenly secrets appeared, an invisible force descended and distorted all the karma in this place. It made everything look like what the heavenly secrets showed. That was the sorrow of low-level cultivators. Their realms were not as good as Daluo Jinxian's. They could not even detect that their memories had been silently tampered with. In the dark, Feng Zichen secretly glanced at Zenuanzi and realized that his expression was normal. He did not look embarrassed at all. Obviously, it was not the first time he had experienced such a thing. No wonder. In the legends of the later generations, as long as they are still alive, they are all incomparably grand and righteous. Any one of his deeds will make the future generations feel deeply moved. It turns out that the dark history of them has been covered up by the heavenly Tao, causing the future generations to not be able to see and pursue it. That makes them look like the incarnation of justice. Only those mighty figures who died in the long river of time were abandoned by the heavenly Tao. Only then did the deeds of harming the primordial world spread out and be known by the future generations. The legends of the later generations cannot be trusted. At that moment, Feng Zichen seemed to have figured something out. Not all the dead mighty figures were bad. Only the dead mighty figures who had lost the cover of the heavenly Tao would become bad. The living mighty figures had the cover of the heavenly Tao. Of course, they were all good. As for the remaining mighty figures, only the heavens knew what they were like. Chapter 232. That's right. How could there be so many righteous figures in the primordial world? All of them look so perfect and flawless. No matter how I look at it, it feels fake. Shaking his head, Feng Zichen thought. In this world, apart from the great Tao of the chaos outside the realm, nothing was perfect. Even Pangu was only infinitely close to perfection, but not truly perfect. Perfection was what Pangu and all the living beings in the world were pursuing. If even Pangu could not do it, how could the mighty figures of the primordial world do it? Fake. It was too fake. However, on second thought, Feng Zichen could also enjoy the treatment that they could enjoy. This made him much more excited. In other words, from now on, Feng Zichen would also become an incomparably righteous figure in the primordial world and be respected by all the living beings in the primordial world. In life, who didn't want to have a better image? Fellow Taoist Zichen, if you have time in the future, you can come to Longevity Mountain for a chat. Poor Wei still has something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Zenyuanzi put away the earth book, first bowed to Nuwa, then turned to Feng Zichen and said, "If I have time, I'll definitely visit you." With a smile, Feng Zichen replied, "Okay." Nodding, Zenyuanzi's figure flashed and disappeared from the North Sea. Fellow Taoist, I hope you can consider what poor Wei said. The heavenly court is the center of the primordial world. That is the place where we can show off our skills. After Zenyuanzi left, Kunpeng did not want to stay here for long. He continued to persuade Feng Zichen. Without waiting for him to reply, he said to Nuwa, "Fellow Nuwa, there have been a series of changes in the North Sea. Poor Wei still needs to appease the living beings here. I'll take my leave first. Fellow Taoist Kunpeng, if you have something to do, go and do it as soon as possible. Don't worry about poor Wei." Nuwa waved her hand and said nonchalantly, "Feng Zichen greets the Holy Mother." After Kunpeng left, Feng Zichen stepped forward and bowed to Nuwa respectfully. There's no need for such formalities. With a wave of her hand, she lifted Feng Zichen up. Nuwa smiled and said, "When I first met you, you were just a child who had just stepped onto the path of cultivation. At that time, you were in the lesser heaven stage, a stage that had never appeared in the primordial era. From that moment on, I knew that you were destined to be extraordinary. As expected, you didn't disappoint me. With your great wisdom, you established the Tao of gods and devils, opening up a great path to the heavens for the creatures after heaven. Even though I knew that you were extraordinary, I still didn't expect that in just over 100,000 years, you would complete the heaven-defying change of fate. Not only did you attain the Tao of Daluo Jingxian, but you also transformed from a creature after heaven to an authentic Pangu. In terms of background, even I am far inferior to you. In the primordial era, only the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral shamans can be compared to you." Nuwa was not surprised that Feng Zichen could cultivate the Daluo Jingxian. After all, he was an existence who could open up the path of Tao for countless creatures after heaven at a young age. His wisdom was something she had never seen in her life. It could be said that it would be strange if Feng Zichen could not become the Daluo Jingxian. Even if Feng Zichen only used more than 100,000 years to cultivate the Daluo Jingxian, Nuwa was only surprised, not shocked. What really surprised her was that Feng Zichen had become the authentic Pangu. This was simply impossible. In the entire primordial era, there were countless innate god-fiends born from the flesh and blood of Pangu. There were only 15 who claimed to be the authentic Pangu. Countless innate fiend gods yearned for the identity of the true Pangu clan. Others did not know the origin of Feng Zichen, but Nuwa knew it very well. He was Feng Zichen, a postnatal creature, and had nothing to do with the great Taoist priests of Pangu. How could he surpass the innate god-fiends born from the flesh and blood of Pangu and obtain the approval of the will of Pangu before them and become the 16th authentic Pangu of the primordial era? It was a coincidence. It's all thanks to the favor of the great Taoist priests. Feng Zichen said modestly as he bowed in the direction of Mount Buzhou. Attaining the Tao in the chaos outside the realm was one of his greatest secrets. It was also his hope of attaining the Tao in the future. At the same time, it was also his resurrection. However, it was not appropriate to mention it to outsiders. The heavens were impermanent and moved with the world. If he did not become a saint, he would be blessed by the heavens today. However, who could guarantee that the heavens would always be blessed by the heavens? It was always good to have an additional path of resurrection. That's right. Without the approval of the great Taoist priests, even if your talent is amazing in the primordial era, you can only become an innate god fiend and not an authentic Pangu. Feng Zichen's casual reason sounded quite reasonable to Nuwa. The most difficult thing to become an authentic Pangu was to obtain the approval of the will of Pangu. A group of innate god fiends born from the flesh and blood of Pangu were stuck here. No matter how hard they tried, they could not obtain the approval of the will of Pangu and transform into an authentic Pangu. On the contrary, as long as they could obtain the approval of the will of Pangu, no matter what their background was, they could become an authentic Pangu. Although Feng Zichen did not obtain the approval of the will of Pangu, he had obtained the approval of the great Tao and had the same effect. At this moment, Feng Zichen could not help but be speechless. He had only said a few words humbly. Who knew that Nuwa would imagine so much? To be honest, Nuwa's thoughts made sense. If she had not experienced it herself, she would have believed it. However, seeing that Nuwa had misunderstood, Feng Zichen was happy. He did not explain and changed the topic. I have to thank the goddess for helping me out. If the two of them really fought, I would be in trouble. If Nuwa was really thinking about the living beings of the North Sea, she would have persuaded the two of them to leave before Zenyuanzi and Kuan-Peng started fighting. Why wait until now? She had clearly come to the North Sea at this time to help Feng Zichen. However, she was worried about his face and was afraid that he would be looked down upon by the mighty figures of the primordial world. That was why she used saving the living beings of the North Sea as an excuse. Feng Zichen was a smart person. How could he not see Nuwa's intention? It doesn't matter. Even without the two of them, I would have come here. You have established the Khanate sword principle this time and made a name for yourself in the primordial world. It can be said that you have greatly improved my reputation. Naturally, I have to give you some benefits. Tell me, what do you want? As long as it is within my ability, I can give it to you. Apart from luck, the only thing that saints fought for was their pride. Feng Zichen was Nuwa's disciple. He had caused such a big commotion in the primordial world, which naturally greatly improved Nuwa's reputation. It made him better than the other saints and let him have a good time. Therefore, she was naturally very happy. She could not help but walk down from the palace of Empress Hua and wanted to reward Feng Zichen. Your Highness, I want. Hearing Nuwa's words, Feng Zichen's first reaction was that he wanted to obtain the Khanate Taiyin origin. This item was extremely important to him. With this item, he could cultivate the peerless magic, the Khanate Taiyin divine light. At that time, coupled with the Khanate Taiyang divine light on his body, he could cultivate the supreme magic, the Khanate Yin-Yang divine light. If he could combine it with the Khanate five elements divine light and evolve it further, he could cultivate the legendary magic, the Khanate Yin-Yang divine light. He could comprehend the wonders of Yin and Yang and the five elements and produce endless creation. The Khanate Taiyin origin existed on the Taiyin star. If Feng Zichen wanted to get it, it would be extremely difficult. However, Nuwa was different. They were both primordial goddesses and had listened to the Tao together in the Purple Cloud Palace. The two of them were naturally very familiar with each other. Not to mention, she was the matchmaker and presided over the wedding of Dijun and Shihi. With the friendship between the two of them, if Nuwa asked Shihi for the Khanate Taiyin origin, Shihi would not refuse. Therefore, without thinking, Feng Zichen was about to blurt out that he wanted the Khanate Taiyin origin. However, as soon as he said that, he saw the merit behind him from the corner of his eye. With a boom, it was like a bolt of thunder in his mind. A bold idea that would affect the future of the human race appeared in his mind. It was extremely strong and could not be dismissed. He forcefully changed the words that he was about to blurt out. Goddess, I want to borrow your cauldron of heaven and earth. Once he said that, there was no way to change it. Feng Zichen could only continue according to the thoughts in his mind. I once heard that the Khanate treasure, the cauldron of heaven and earth, is the #1 refining treasure in the primordial world. It can refine all the treasures in the world and has the ability to go against the Khanate. It can refine Khanate spirit treasures. Now, I have some treasures that I want to refine into a handy magic weapon, but I can't find a suitable refining magic weapon. I just heard that the cauldron of heaven and earth is in your hands. Therefore, Zichen would like to borrow this treasure from you, goddess. After saying that, Feng Zichen bowed to Nuwa. Refined treasures? I didn't expect you to be so rich. Looking at Feng Zichen in surprise, Nuwa said with a smile. Ordinary treasures could not use the cauldron of heaven and earth. Only some top Khanate spirit treasures could use this treasure. Feng Zichen wanted to borrow the cauldron of heaven and earth from her. It seemed that he had a lot of treasures on him. However, although she was surprised, Nuwa did not refuse. It was just lending, not giving. She would not be reluctant to part with it. Although the cauldron of heaven and earth has the ability to go against the Khanate, this function can only be used once every million years. Even if I lend it to you, you can only use it once. You should use it carefully. Moreover, the cauldron of heaven and earth can only refine Khanate spirit treasures at most. As for supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasures, it can't do anything. Taking out the cauldron of heaven and earth, Nuwa handed it to Feng Zichen while reminding him. The ability to go against the Khanate was too heaven-defying. Even if the cauldron of heaven and earth was a Khanate treasure, it could not be used without restrictions. Otherwise, if the cauldron of heaven and earth could continuously refine Khanate spirit treasures, the primordial world would be in chaos. Supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasures were created by the Great Tao. They gathered the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth and seized the fortune of the universe. They were born with the luck of heaven and earth and had unique characteristics. They had endless wonders and could not be refined by humans. The cauldron of heaven and earth was the strongest, but it was far inferior to the primordial world. Naturally, it could not refine supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasures. Chapter 233. 1 cauldron, 2 ears, 3 legs. It symbolized that Tao gave birth to 1, 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to all things. This was the Khanate cardinal treasure, the cauldron of heaven and earth. It had 3 legs and 2 handles, glistening with green light and making the universe hazy. It was like the carrier of the world, the embodiment of the universe. It contained the truth of the great Tao and emitted the chi of origin. According to legend, after the demon god who dominated the great Tao of heaven and earth fell, his body fell into the untainted land and combined with the chaotic vital chi to give birth to a top-level chaotic spiritual treasure, the heaven and earth creation cauldron. The moment this treasure was born, it possessed the power to shake the universe. Because it was formed from the body of the chaos demon god, it inherited the monstrous resentment of the chaos demon god after its death. Therefore, this treasure took advantage of the fact that the primordial world hadn't stabilized completely to suddenly erupt with divine might, and it drew upon the energy of creation in the world with the intention of shattering the grand Tao of the universe and destroying the primordial world. However, as Pangu transformed into all living things, his essence, chi, and soul merged with the will of the primordial world, giving birth to the 3 Taos of man, earth, and heaven. Driven by instinct, the 3 Taos of heaven, earth, and man suddenly attacked. They activated the power of the untainted land and Pangu's remaining power and smashed the heaven and earth creation cauldron into pieces. 50% of its fragments fused with the origin of the universe to form the cauldron of heaven and earth, which fell into the hands of the celestial master of the celestial sect of wonders. Later, ancestor Qingquan died in the immortal slaying formation, and this treasure fell into the hands of Taoist Hongjun. When the Purple Cloud Palace was conferred the position of saint, Taoist Hongjun had given this treasure to Nuwa so that she could use it to suppress her destiny. 30% of the fragments fused with the origin of creation to form the supreme-grade Khanate spiritual treasure, the cauldron of creation. As soon as the cauldron appeared, it disappeared into the primordial world and had yet to appear. The remaining 20% of the fragments were divided into 9 pieces and scattered all over the primordial world. Later, it was obtained by you, the great of the human race. He used the power of the human race to refine it into 9 cauldrons to suppress the destiny of the human race. Taking the cauldron of heaven and earth from Nuwa, Feng Zichen felt a huge force coming at him. It was as if a part of the world of heaven and earth was pressing down on him, causing his arms to sink. The cauldron of heaven and earth, as its name implied, was a world of its own. How could it be light? It must be incomparably heavy. As a saint, Nuwa could easily pick up 100 or even 1,000 square meters of space, let alone a single world. However, it was different for Feng Zichen. It was difficult for the Daluo Jingxian to lift the cauldron of heaven and earth. He couldn't help but bend down and exert all the strength in his body. Only then was he able to lift the cauldron of heaven and earth so that it wouldn't slip out of his hands and make a fool of himself. Good treasure. Feng Zichen praised as he looked at the cauldron of heaven and earth in his hand. One had to know that he was an existence that proved his Tao through strength. His strength was far beyond the imagination of the world. Even so, it was extremely strenuous for him to lift the cauldron of heaven and earth. In terms of weight alone, the cauldron of heaven and earth could probably suppress a Daluo Jingxian. From this, one could see how powerful this treasure was. I have no use for this cauldron at the moment, so I'll lend it to you for a period of time. I'm sure you'll have enough time to refine quite a few spirit treasures for the human race. After Feng Zichen put away the cauldron of heaven and earth, Nuwa said with a smile. Holy Mother of Mercy, hearing this, Feng Zichen was overjoyed. He had thought that he would have to return the cauldron of heaven and earth after refining a magic treasure. He didn't expect Nuwa to be so generous as to lend it to him for a period of time. This way, he would be able to do a lot of things. All right, don't thank me. Waving her hand, she interrupted Feng Zichen's words of gratitude. Nuwa asked, what are your plans for the future? While presiding over the affairs of the human race, I'll search for opportunities in the tunnel, hoping to bear the tunnel flower and obtain the great Taoist priest's karma. After thinking for a while, Feng Zichen replied. Of course, he had many plans, but it was not convenient for him to tell others. At the moment, 2 of his 3 flowers had bloomed, and he still lacked the tunnel flower. He could use this as an excuse. Great Taoist priests. That's right. You can be said to be the first person in the primordial world to bloom the flower of the heavenly Tao and the flower of the human Tao. You're only one step away from the legendary great Taoist priest's karma. It would be a pity if you give up now. Nuwa understood Feng Zichen's thoughts very well. Putting herself in his shoes, if she were in Feng Zichen's current state, she would also attack the great Taoist priest's karma. That was the great Taoist priests. The highest achievement of Daluo Jingxian. The Daluo Jingxian here was not the Daluo Jingxian of the primordial world, but the Daluo Jingxian of the primordial era. It was the Daluo Jingxian of the Sage-to-be realm. It was the real Khanate Taoist priests. The great Taoist priests, in other words, was the first person below the saints. The tunnel contains all things. It is the path of creation and the path of all things. All life, death, and reincarnation in the primordial world are in it. If you want to refine the tunnel flower, you still need to put in more effort on the path of creation and life and death. The path of creation and the tunnel overlapped a lot. As the highest achiever of the path of creation, Nuwa did not specialize in the tunnel, but it was inevitable that she had some understanding of the tunnel by analogy. Therefore, she reminded Feng Zichen. Thank you, Your Highness. Zichen will remember it. Feng Zichen bowed and thanked her. Although he had a complete plan in his heart, Nuwa's advice could also provide him with a lot of help. It's good that you know what to do. Nodding, Nuwa suddenly said, Oh, right. Master has already erased the demon ancestor's divine will from the pagoda that I took from you last time. You can use it now. The pagoda symbolizes the return of all spirits. It contains the great Tao of death and a portion of the Tao of life. With this pagoda in hand, it might help you comprehend the tunnel. Nuwa flipped her hand and took out the pagoda. She handed it to Feng Zichen. In order to control the authority of death, the demon ancestor Rahu had created the pagoda, a supreme treasure. He wanted to use this pagoda to evolve the world of death and establish the return of the dead. Life and death were important parts of the tunnel. Therefore, it was not impossible to use the authority of death to trace the mighty power of the tunnel. Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Tao Ancestor. After receiving the pagoda, Feng Zichen said excitedly. This Dharma treasure was in the hands of Tao Ancestor Hong Jun. After going through it, all the hidden dangers were gone. It could be used normally. He no longer had to worry about demon ancestor Rahu's plot. Moreover, the power of the pagoda was close to that of a connate cardinal treasure. It was not weaker than any connate spirit treasure. It could be connected to the origin of death and had a trace of primordial chaos Tao runes. It was a rare supreme treasure in the primordial world. With this pagoda in hand, Daluo Jinxian's chances of breaking through to the primordial chaos realm were higher than others. Anyone who obtained this pagoda would be excited. This matter is over. I should leave. With that said, Nuwa waved her hand and scattered boundless creation aura. It enveloped the entire North Sea, bathing all the living beings in North Sea in the creation aura. After all, they had come in the name of saving the living beings in North Sea. It was not right to leave without giving them some benefits. Therefore, Nuwa scattered the creation aura to raise the foundation of the living beings in North Sea to understand the karma of this matter. Also, you should know that the heavenly courts is not a good place. Do not form a karma with them. Before leaving, Nuwa suddenly reminded Feng Zichen. With that, her figure disappeared and returned to Nuwa Palace. Farewell, Your Majesty. Looking in the direction Nuwa left, Feng Zichen said with some envy. A sage could reach any place in the untainted land with just a thought. It was really enviable. The heavenly courts. I'm not sick. Why would I go there to court death? At this time, Di Jun might have the intention of recruiting him. However, when the untainted land geomancy map appeared and the wizard tribe's strength increased greatly, Di Jun would tear him apart. Running to the heavenly courts now was equivalent to sitting at the mouth of a volcano that could erupt at any time. Perhaps in the next moment, he would be doomed eternally. After bowing to the North Pole, Feng Zichen turned and flew toward the chaos outside the sky. That was the chaos that belonged to the untainted land. Although it was also full of danger, it was many times safer than the chaos outside the world. Daluo Jinxian entered it. As long as he was careful, he would not encounter the danger of dying. This time, Feng Zichen even borrowed the Khanate supreme treasure, the cauldron of heaven and earth. The treasure he refined was definitely beyond imagination. It was bound to alarm the entire untainted land. In order to avoid attracting the attention of outsiders, the chaos outside the sky was the safest. No matter what he did, the impact on the untainted land would be minimal. Boom! Arriving in the sky, Feng Zichen suddenly moved. A terrifying power erupted from his body, shattering the endless void and opening a passage that led directly to the chaos outside the sky. This energy wasn't magic power, nor was it the energy of the great Tao. It was purely the energy of the physical body. If an outsider were to see this scene, they would definitely be extremely shocked. After the 6 sages appeared, the spacetime of the untainted land became abnormally stable and could not be easily shaken. Only Daluo Jinxian could use the power of the Great Path to shatter the void. Feng Zichen could shatter the void with just the power of his physical body. It was enough to show his strength. If he used the power of the Great Path, it would be terrible. Using strength to prove one's Tao was so powerful. The aura of chaos here is much more docile than that of the great chaos outside the realm. It was Feng Zichen's first time in the chaos outside the sky. There was still some difference between what he saw and what he thought. In his opinion, the chaos outside the sky that made even Daluo Jinxian feel a sense of danger should not have the scene of destruction, but it should have ups and downs, stirring up endless waves of chaos and surging violently. Unfortunately, although the aura of chaos here was rolling endlessly, and there were earth, fire, water, and wind, the power was too weak. It was far less magnificent than the great chaos outside the realm. It hit his body lazily. Not only did it not make Feng Zichen feel uncomfortable, but it made him feel abnormally comfortable. Awesome! After taking a breath of the aura of chaos, Feng Zichen felt comfortable all over and could not help but moan. Then, he found a place and sat down cross-legged to sense the heavenly path space. Fortunately, the chaos here was located in the untainted land. It was not like the great chaos outside the realm, where there was no concept of space-time. Feng Zichen's spiritual sense connected with the heavenly path space without any hindrance. Heavenly path space, open. A purple light flashed between his eyebrows. Feng Zichen's connate indestructible true spirit took a step out of the school of the Emperor's star, left his body, crossed the boundless void, and arrived at the 36th level of the heavenly path space. Rumble. The connate sword Dao automatically appeared and turned into 365 connate runes. They constantly alternated, giving birth to endless runes that covered the entire heavenly path space. Chapter 234. From the 39th floor to the first floor, the entire 39th floor of the heavenly Dao space was covered with connate runes. They were densely packed and innumerable. With a buzzing sound, the connate runes suddenly disappeared and were imprinted in the heavenly Dao space. Then, specks of light appeared and gradually gathered into a ball in the air. It was shaped like a fruit and was dazzling. Connate Dao runes filled the air. It was a Dao fruit. The Daluo Dao fruit that belonged to the connate sword Dao. As soon as the Daluo Dao fruit appeared, it fell into Feng Zichen's body, causing his aura to soar by a small margin. At this time, Feng Zichen could be considered as the Daluo Jingxian that truly belonged to the primordial world. Previously, he had only established the connate sword Dao and did not use it to prove his Dao. The Daluo power in his body came from the Dao of the stars. It was the Dao of the chaos, not the Dao of the primordial world. Now that the Daluo Dao fruit had entered his body, Feng Zichen could be considered to have proven the connate sword Dao. He had truly cultivated the Daluo Jingxian in the primordial world and was immortal. This is considered the second time I've proven my Dao. Feeling the skyrocketing power in his body, Feng Zichen muttered to himself. First, he had proven the Dao of the stars in the great chaos of the outer realm. Now, he had proven the connate sword Dao in the primordial world. In total, he had done it twice. Soon, Feng Zichen would try to prove the Dao of the connate 5 elements. In that case, he would have proven his Dao 3 times. His strength would definitely be greatly improved. In the competition between Daluo Jingxian, it was no longer important whether one's Dharma power was strong or not. They mainly relied on the power of their own great Dao. They used their own great Dao to affect the rules of heaven and earth and erupt with destructive power. Therefore, the more great Daos they proved, the greater their influence on the rules of heaven and earth and the stronger the power they could mobilize. At the same time, it was also difficult to kill the Daluo Jingxian who had proven his Dao many times. This was because they had left imprints on too many great paths. Only by erasing these imprints one by one could they fall. After stabilizing his cultivation, Feng Zichen passed through the heavenly Dao space and arrived on the North Star. In the next moment, Feng Zichen's innate indestructible true spirit flashed and returned to the Ziwei Dao fetus. The Ziwei Dao fetus was Feng Zichen's true foundation. Now that his great Dao had been formed, he needed to return to the Dao fetus to avoid any accidents. The true spirit returned to its original position. Instantly, boundless Daoist rhymes gushed out of its body and merged with the Ziwei Daoist fetus. Gradually, the structure of the Ziwei Daoist fetus was transformed into the Pangu Daoist fetus. At the same time, in between Feng Zichen's eyebrows, the Zichen seal bestowed by the great Dao was also glowing. It was filled with Daoist rhymes and exuded an indescribable power. The purple light was sparkling as if it had merged with the starry sky. It was collecting the information that Pangu had dissipated here and transmitting it to the Ziwei Dao fetus, accelerating its transformation into the Pangu Dao fetus. In this way, when the Ziwei Dao fetus was completely mature, the innate divine being born, the Ziwei the Great, would no longer be the starry Dao body, but the Pangu Dao body. It could be called the Daluo Jinxian realm, the strongest physical body. The Ziwei star was formed from the Pangu's ancestral aperture. It has infinite creation. The ancestral aperture is the foundation of a human being. It is the residence of one's god. And the god of Pangu, long before Pangu's body transformed into all things, it had merged with the will of the primitive world and turned into the heavenly Tao. In other words, the Ziwei star is the foundation of Pangu. It is the place where his god is, the former residence of the heavenly Tao, and also the place where he was born. In this way, if the innate divine being born from the Ziwei star is not the authentic Pangu, who else can be called the authentic Pangu? Thinking of the origin of the Ziwei star, Feng Zichen could not help but feel a little excited. Although his human body was also the Pangu Dao body, it also had its flaws. That was, the human body was born postnatal and had no blood relationship with the Pangu. At this time, the primordial world was still based on birth and bloodline. Feng Zichen's birth made his identity as the authentic Pangu seem a little unjustified. It was inevitable that it would cause criticism. However, the Ziwei Dao fetus was different. He, who was born in the Ziwei star, was of the same origin as the heavenly Tao. He was the incarnation of the god of Pangu. His identity was even nobler than the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral shamans. He was the most authentic direct descendant of the Pangu in the primordial world. Otherwise, how could the great emperor of Ziwei command the stars, dominate the universe, control the laws of heaven and earth, control the life and death of the netherworld? He ruled the stars, controlled all laws, and ruled Fengdu. He was the symbol of all emperors and the most noble existence in the primordial world. It was also because of this that in the legends of later generations, there was no innate divine being born on the Ziwei star. How could the heavenly Tao allow such a heaven-defying existence to be born? Feng Zichen came. He, who had accidentally connected with the Ziwei star, prompted the Ziwei star to give birth to the Ziwei Dao fetus and obtained this heaven-defying opportunity. The heavenly Tao could not stop the birth of the Ziwei Dao fetus. No matter how heaven-defying he was still an existence of the same origin as the heavenly Tao. Therefore, the heavenly Tao could only stop the Ziwei star from giving birth to the innate Tao fetus. It could not destroy the innate Tao fetus that had already been born. Not only that, after the birth of the great emperor of Ziwei, the heavenly Tao had to give him the greatest glory of the primordial world. It had to let everything in the world celebrate and bless his birth. The great emperor of Ziwei is already extraordinary. Now, he has obtained so many insights from Pangu's Tao body. When he is truly born, it won't be an exaggeration to say that he will be called Little Pangu. In the Ziwei Dao fetus, Feng Zichen felt the changes in his body and was pleasantly surprised. In terms of essence, the innate divine being born in the Ziwei star was the closest to Pangu. No one in the primordial world could compare to it. At this moment, he had the help of Pangu's Tao runes. Its intrinsic quality had improved a little. He really did not know how powerful he would be after he was born. Alright, it's time to get down to business. 300 years later, Feng Zichen woke up from comprehending the changes in the Ziwei Dao fetus. With a thought, the human body sitting cross-legged in the chaos outside the sky suddenly emitted a bright divine light and spread out the chaotic aura for thousands of miles. In an instant, the illusory true spirit returned. Feng Zichen's thought descended again, and the human body stood up again. Freedom is still the best. It's too boring to stay in the Ziwei Dao fetus. Feng Zichen sighed as he stretched his limbs. As long as Di Jun was alive, the Ziwei Dao fetus could not be born. It could only stay on the Ziwei star and wait for the opportunity. How troublesome. With a sigh, Feng Zichen put these troubles behind him. He took out the cauldron of heaven and earth and planned to refine a magic treasure. This time, what he wanted to refine was not an ordinary magic treasure, nor was it an innate spirit treasure. It was a status. The status that belonged to the human race, the status of the human emperor. It gathered the destiny of the human race, firm beliefs, and the spirit of self-improvement into one. It shook the human path in the unseen world, forcing him to descend and activate the cauldron of heaven and earth with all his might. He wanted to merge the three into one. Chapter 235. The development of the human race had already reached a bottleneck. Only by giving birth to an emperor who could command everything of the human race, lead the human race to the untainted land, and compete with all races for hegemony, could they take another step forward. However, the current untainted land was the most prosperous and dazzling era. There were as many Daluo Jinxian as there were stars in the sky. Sage-to-be mighty figures were all over the untainted land, and all kinds of powerful figures had gathered to suppress the universe. Even the saints did not dare to call themselves invincible. In this era where there were many strong people, Daluo Jinxian's strength was not enough. He was not qualified to call himself an emperor. At the very least, he had to be a sage-to-be expert. With Daluo Jinxian's realm, it was more than enough to call himself an emperor in the future. But at this time, if this matter was spread out, it would definitely make people laugh. Feng Zichen and the human race would also become the laughingstock of the untainted land. He, of course, was unwilling. Therefore, Feng Zichen borrowed the innate cardinal treasure cauldron of heaven and earth from Nuwa and wanted to create a sage-to-be human emperor. Of course, the current luck of the human race was far from the level of the future, which covered the entire untainted land. With its current power, it could only support a Daluo Jinxian level expert for the human race. If he wanted to go further and become a sage-to-be expert, the luck of the human race would be powerless. However, Feng Zichen was not worried about this at all. Not enough luck? Don't worry, merit will make up for it. Now, Feng Zichen did not lack Xianhuang merit. He, who had a body of merit, had some surplus even if he created a top-grade postnatal cardinal treasure like the merit spiritual light. What's more, after establishing the innate sword principle, the heavenly Tao gave him endless merit. In this way, Feng Zichen had an incredible amount of Xianhuang merit. If he refined all these merit, it would not be difficult for him to reach the late stage of the sage-to-be realm, let alone the sage-to-be realm. Using the heaven and earth merit combined with the destiny of the human race, coupled with the many treasures on his body, the mighty power of the human path as the fire, and the chi of origin as the fuel. In the innate cardinal treasure cauldron of heaven and earth, he created a human emperor comparable to a pre-saint. This was Feng Zichen's plan. At that time, Nuwa asked him what he wanted, and he almost blurted out that he wanted the innate Taiyin origin. However, from the corner of his eyes, he saw the merit aura behind him. At that time, this bold idea suddenly and uncontrollably appeared in his heart, and it became more and more intense. He could not help but change his words and borrow the cauldron of heaven and earth. Since the merits were useless to him, why not use them to refine a status comparable to that of a sage-to-be and pass it on to the next generation of the human race and protect the human race? With the status of a quasi-saint, no matter how the situation fluctuated, the human race would always have a quasi-saint overseeing it. They might not be able to dominate the primordial world. However, there was absolutely no problem in defending one side. A quasi-sage, placed in any era, would be an overlord. Heh, with a deep snort, Feng Zichen forced the fate of the human race out of his body. Immediately, a ball of Xianhua, shrouded in five-colored light, appeared beside him. It shone with divine light and emitted a shocking power. Go! Pointing at Xianhua, Feng Zichen threw it into the cauldron of heaven and earth. Then, he waved his hand and suddenly grabbed in front of him. The void shattered, and wisps of light appeared, surging towards him with the prayers of all living beings. This was the power of incense, which contained the good wishes of countless clansmen for the human race. Since the birth of the human race, it had always existed and could be said to be endless. Now, Feng Zichen took it and used it as the main material to refine the human emperor's status. After taking the power of incense, Feng Zichen calmed his mind and activated the power of Sword Dao with all his strength, forcefully shaking the long river of destiny. Rumble. After a loud bang, the long river of destiny that had been calm for a long time changed again. The entire river was shaking violently, setting off boundless waves, each higher than the last. Who knew how many people's destinies were disturbed, changing their destinies? Suddenly, in the depths of the long river of destiny, a small tributary appeared, emitting a hazy white light. It was not dazzling, but warm and gentle, slowly flowing to an unknown place. That was the river of destiny that belonged to the human race. It was one of the countless tributaries of the long river of destiny. The destiny of all the humans gathered here. Out! A majestic divine sense surged out and slammed into the tributary. The river water flew up, and a grand spirit appeared. That spirit was vigorous and exuded the belief of self-improvement, shaking one's heart. It was the immortal belief and indestructible spirit of the human race. As soon as it appeared, it leaped high from the long river of destiny, crossed the boundless void, and surged into the cauldron of heaven and earth. Boom, 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 the fate of the human race, the power of incense, and the spirit of the human race gathered in the cauldron of heaven and earth, entangling and fusing with each other, producing a strange power. From there, it broke the seal of the cauldron of heaven and earth and spread into the chaos beyond the heavens. As if shaking the universe, the chaos beyond the heavens trembled. The light of the human path flickered, and a mighty force appeared out of thin air and exploded, turning into a raging fire that burned toward the cauldron of heaven and earth. This was the fire of the human path. Great! Seeing this, Feng Zichen was excited. He hurriedly took off the merit on his back and sent it all into the cauldron of heaven and earth. Then, with a flip of his hand, he took out the merit light and crushed it, sending it into the cauldron of heaven and earth. To Feng Zichen, his strongest defensive means in the past, the merit light, had long been useless. It was useless to keep it in his hands. It was better to integrate it into the human emperor's position to strengthen his power. Clang, under the burning of the human path fire, even the cauldron of heaven and earth was trembling. The power of creation gushed out endlessly, as if it was going to recreate the universe and the world. Under the pressure of the power of creation, the four tangible and intangible forces gathered into a ball and compressed continuously. Gradually, they took on a physical form and revealed the aura of the human path. It's not enough. Seeing the change in the destiny of the human race, Feng Zichen frowned in dissatisfaction. Then, as if he had thought of something, he reached out his hand and grabbed toward the ancestral land of the human race. In the sky above the ancestral temple of the human race, there was a purple-gold divine dragon bathed in the Ziwei starlight. It was constantly devouring the dragon qi in all directions and slowly growing. This was the Emperor's qi, the fusion of the dragon vein qi and the Ziwei starlight. It was the strongest power in the world that could isolate all Daos, obliterate mana, and destroy all supernatural powers. As an emperor, he should be as brilliant as the sun and have supreme majesty. How could he not have the emperor's qi? Therefore, thinking of this, Feng Zichen moved. He took action from the chaos beyond the heavens and captured the emperor's qi, sending it into the human emperor's position that was about to take shape. On the Ziwei star, Feng Zichen's innate indestructible true spirit forcefully separated a part of the origin of the Ziwei star and sent it into the cauldron of heaven and earth. Chapter 236. The Ziwei star's origin could also be called the Emperor's origin. It was the carrier of the Tao of the innate Emperor. Boom! 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 As the Ziwei star's origin fused, the fluctuations from the cauldron of heaven and earth became even stronger as it trembled violently. The power of creation surged out, erupting with sparkling white light that illuminated the entire cauldron. Through the walls of the cauldron, one could clearly see the human emperor's position that had been dyed golden by the Xianhuang merit earlier. At this moment, under the influence of the Ziwei star's origin, it was gradually dyed with a hint of purple, transforming into a purplish gold color. At the same time, the emperor purple qi that the human race had nurtured for many years turned back into a five-clawed divine dragon that circled around the human emperor's position. And under the influence of its aura, this divine dragon also underwent a change. The dragon's aura on its body became stronger, revealing its noble appearance. There was a faint trend of metamorphosis, as if it was about to transform into a nine-clawed divine dragon. Not enough. With a low voice, Feng Zichen took out the chaos bead, summoned the great Tao divine diagram, and spread out the chaos formation. It absorbed all the chaos qi from all directions and poured it into the human emperor's position. Then, a mysterious yellow light bloomed on its body, constantly surging and flying into the cauldron of heaven and earth. That was the Xianhuang Mother Qi, also known as the origin of heaven and earth. It was a treasure that Feng Zichen had obtained from the ancient ruins. At the same time, the Buddha pagoda also flew out from Feng Zichen's body. It also spewed out Xianhuang Mother Qi, and it was twice as much as Feng Zichen's. At that time, the ancient ruins were about to be destroyed, and the Xianhuang Mother Qi was born. Feng Zichen, Xing Tian, World Devastator Taoist, and the others each obtained 10% of the Xianhuang Mother Qi. Only the Buddha pagoda obtained 20% of the Xianhuang Mother Qi by chance. It could be said to be the best among them. Now, it was all taken out by Feng Zichen to strengthen the power of the human emperor's position. Boom! Boom! The mighty power of the human Tao that descended from the unseen became stronger and stronger. Terrifying power overflowed, even the chaos was distorting. Under this power, the power of the cauldron of heaven and earth was completely stimulated. It was like a world had been reopened, and it was about to create the universe. Earth, fire, water, and wind surged and formed the energy of the world. Immediately, the chaotic qi that was surging over was divided into the purest innate qi of creation. It carried endless Taoist rhymes as it surged toward the human emperor's position. If he wanted to use the supreme ability of the cauldron of heaven and earth, he would be able to revert to Xiantian. Unfortunately, the position of the human emperor was too extraordinary. If it was converted into a spiritual treasure, it would not be weaker than any supreme-grade innate spiritual treasure. Although the cauldron of heaven and earth was powerful, it couldn't refine a supreme-grade innate spiritual treasure created by heaven and earth. Therefore, even though there were waves of connate spiritual light, endless Taoist rhymes, and even connate runes on the human emperor's body, it couldn't complete the final transformation and become a connate object. Pre-celestial and post-celestial were only 2 words apart, but they were as different as heaven and earth. Natural treasures were created by the Grand Tao and nurtured by the heavens and the earth, and they possessed indestructible characteristics. Even if it was broken, it would repair itself one day. However, things were different for acquired items. As a human-made treasure, if it was broken, it would be broken. Unless the owner spent a lot of treasures to reconstruct it, it would be impossible for it to repair itself. In other words, Feng Zichen spent a lot of peerless treasures to refine the human emperor's position. If it was broken in a great battle, it would be completely destroyed. If he wanted to condense the human emperor's position again, he would have to refine it again. The other treasures were easy to find. He could still find them with some effort. However, the Xianhuang source qi was the only layer left in the world. It couldn't be found anymore. Therefore, the human emperor's position had to be recognized by heaven and earth and become a connate object. Otherwise, it wouldn't mean much to the human race. If he was careless, the human emperor's position would be damaged. It would be an unbearable pain. Tree of World, refine. Summoning the Tree of World from the Chaos Bead, Feng Zichen placed it above the cauldron of heaven and earth and used the origin power of the Tree of World to strengthen the cauldron of heaven and earth. The Tree of World was a chaos spiritual root. If it was refined into a spiritual treasure, it would be a chaos supreme treasure. If it transformed into a human form, it would be a chaos demon god. Even if such a supreme spiritual object hadn't grown to its peak, it still had incredible power. Especially the Tree of World, which contained the power to open up a realm. That realm wasn't the upper-class world, but the more powerful chaotic world. It was a world second only to the untainted land. It had great creation and great opportunities. In terms of going against the connate, it was much better than the cauldron of heaven and earth. Not to mention supreme-grade connate spiritual treasures, it could even nurture rare connate supreme treasures in the untainted land. Moreover, the Tree of World was a chaos spiritual root. The rules of the untainted land couldn't restrict it. There was no limit to the number of times it could refine connate spiritual treasures. As long as it had enough connate origin, it could refine as many as it wanted. It was far from comparable to the cauldron of heaven and earth. Unfortunately, the Tree of World hadn't grown to perfection. Its ability was far less powerful than the legend said. Even so, it might not be much weaker than the cauldron of heaven and earth in going against the connate. The tree of world and the cauldron of heaven and earth alone might not be able to refine supreme-grade connate spiritual treasures, but the two work together with the power of merit and the Xianhuang Mother Qi. The birth of the human emperor must be a connate object. It could blend with heaven and earth and become a status derived from the Tao of heaven and earth. It was indestructible and had incredible power. Whoosh! The origin of the world fell from the roots of the tree of world like a waterfall and landed on the cauldron of heaven and earth below. At this moment, the cauldron of heaven and earth completely changed. Bright green light burst out, and countless connate runes flew out, covering thousands of miles of chaos. Everything in the surroundings was fixed. The rules were distorted, and cognition was changed. The thousands of miles of chaos turned into a world of heaven and earth. It seemed to be only thousands of miles in size, but it was also vast and boundless. As the saying goes, a mountain contains a mustard seed, and a mustard seed contains a mountain. This was it. The world was vast, with the division of heaven and earth and the derivation of rules. Earth, fire, water, and wind raged endlessly. The 5 elements cycled back and forth, showing the beauty of the world and giving birth to endless creation. In the center of the world of heaven and earth, the human emperor's status floated there quietly, accepting the refinement of the world's rules and the baptism of endless creation. Taoist rhymes surrounded his body, and connate spiritual light shone brightly. Vast divine power spread out, gradually transforming into connate, and immortal Tao light shone. Emperor, great, beginning. The word emperor in the connate godly text looked like a sun, symbolizing glory and brilliance. This was also the reason why Di Jun was born as the emperor. The word huang in the human clan was like a burning lamp, representing the eternal life of the human clan. It also represented that Swerin drilled wood to make fire, lighting the fire of the human race's civilization, making the human race wise and having a heritage. To the human race, mastering fire was no less than splitting heaven and earth. Therefore, Feng Zichen created the word emperor, with this as the core. Emperor Sui built fire for the human race, eternal. Chapter 237. The title of emperor was not something an ordinary person could bear. Those who did not have the destiny to call themselves emperor were bound to suffer. Feng Zichen was born with the destiny of Ziwei. He had the destiny of the celestial emperor. He was a treasure of the soul and the master of the stars. He had great merit for both the human race and the untainted land. With his identity, he could even sit on the throne of the celestial emperor, the master of the untainted land, not to mention the title of emperor. Speaking of which, the current strength of the human race was not ranked in the untainted land. It was not enough to be taken seriously by the innate races. If Feng Zichen became the emperor, he would be wronged in the eyes of the great beings. The current human race was not worthy of Feng Zichen's identity. How could a small post-celestial race be able to support a dignified Pangu, the sword ancestor of the untainted land, a supreme figure with great wisdom, merit, and perseverance? Feng Zichen's world was in the boundless untainted land. Back then, when Kuan Peng persuaded Feng Zichen to join the heavenly court, he had hinted that as long as he was willing to join the heavenly court, the positions of the 9 heavenly masters would be vacant. This was not a joke. If Feng Zichen really agreed to join the heavenly court, Di Jun, Tai, Fushi, and the others would definitely appear together with the heavenly cycle demon gods. They would personally welcome him into the heavenly court with the highest etiquette outside the southern heavenly gate to show that they valued him. The remaining 5 positions of the heavenly masters would be up to Feng Zichen to choose at will. If Di Jun was stingy with the position of the heavenly master, he would casually arrange an idle position for Feng Zichen. Before Feng Zichen could say anything, the great beings of the untainted land would not be able to stand it anymore and would criticize Di Jun. After all, his identity was different now. He was no longer a post-celestial life form that was inferior to ants. Instead, he was the true descendant of the Pangu, an innate saint. He had become a member of the great beings and was incomparably noble. No one in this world could look down on him, let alone humiliate him. Otherwise, the heavens and earth would definitely sense it and erase one's luck and fortune as punishment. The heaven realm was composed of 9 heavens. According to the distribution of the 9 palaces, the size of each heaven was countless times larger than the great thousand world. It could be said to be vast and boundless. By controlling a greater thousand world, one could immediately become Daluo Jinxian. If one were to become the Sky Master, one would be able to completely control the source of the sky. His strength would then rise to the level of a great perfection demi-saint. Compared to the current position of human emperor, it was much stronger. Therefore, if the great mediums in the untainted land knew that Feng Zichen had become the human emperor, they would definitely sigh in their hearts and feel that the human tribe had delayed him. After all, the providence of the Khanate Sword Dao, the God-Fiend Dao, the Pangu's authentic providence, and the World Tree's providence. Feng Zichen's luck alone had already surpassed the luck of the entire human race. As the human emperor, not only did he not gain any benefits, but he also gave his luck to the human race, making the human race stronger. Wasn't this sacrificing himself to help the human race? The purpose of developing one's power was to gather the providence of heaven and earth so that one's cultivation could improve quickly. If one was implicated by the power, it would affect one's cultivation. It was better not to have this power. Di Jun, Tai, and the 12 ancestral sorcerers could not see this clearly. That was why they were implicated by the shamans and demons. They could not escape in time and were forced to launch the Great Shaman War, causing them to die one after another. Now, Feng Zichen also could not see this clearly. He wanted to use his own luck to replenish the luck of the human tribe. In the eyes of the great mediums, this was extremely stupid. Luck was the supreme treasure of the untainted land and the fuse of the great calamity. Everyone wanted it but could not get it. No one would think that it was too much. They would only feel that it was not enough. Feng Zichen did the opposite. How could he not be stupid? Of course, this was only the thought of the great mediums. Feng Zichen was naturally not stupid. Now, he had too much luck. He was about to reach the point where things would reverse when they reached an extreme. Once the heavenly Tao changed, the universe would reverse. In an instant, his monstrous providence would turn into a fatal talisman and summon countless calamities, causing him to be in danger of dying at any time. Not only could he end the karma between him and the human tribe, but he could also deepen his influence on the human tribe and increase their strength. It could be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The increase in the luck of the human tribe would naturally produce more experts, causing the human tribe to be stronger and have a deeper foundation. If he increased the luck of the human tribe, he would definitely be grateful. It would allow Feng Zichen's influence on him to expand further. Perhaps he could not see anything now, but when the human tribe became the main character of the world in the future, their luck would increase exponentially. The benefits that Feng Zichen would obtain would be immeasurable. When Feng Zichen was crowned emperor, his position in the human tribe would not only be completely stable, but it would also be unprecedentedly improved. His divine appearance would be forever engraved in the destiny of the human tribe and witness the rise and fall of the human tribe together. His status would surpass Swearen in one fell swoop and reach the level of Nuwa. At that time, if the saint wanted to control the destiny of the human tribe again, he would definitely not be able to bypass Feng Zichen. He would have to obtain his consent first before he could order the human tribe around. Otherwise, if the saint forcefully interfered in the affairs of the human tribe without his consent, other than Nuwa, he would form karma with him. Karma had to be repaid. More importantly, Feng Zichen had temporarily obtained the power of the Daluo Jinxian with the help of the human tribe's destiny and formed karma with him. After this incident, the karma between him and the human tribe was completely ended. It could be said that he had removed a burden from his mind. One had to know that only by truly achieving the primordial chaos and making himself flawless, he would be able to end all karma and be at ease. Only then could he break free from the river of time and space in one fell swoop and become the primordial chaos Daluo Jinxian. Logically speaking, this was something that only a sage-to-be would consider. Feng Zichen was only a Daluo Jinxian and was not qualified to consider this. However, he was a Daluo Jinxian who had attained the Tao and the great chaos outside the realm, so he did not reach the sage-to-be realm. After the Daluo realm, it was the primordial chaos Tao realm. Now, He needed to make early preparations for breaking through to the primordial chaos Tao realm. Speaking of which, Hong Jun was indeed a Tao ancestor. He relied on the primordial chaos world to establish the Sage-to-Be realm. It was a transitional stage for Daluo Jingxian to reach the primordial chaos Tao realm. It was extremely mysterious. Compared to Daluo Jingxian, it was undoubtedly much easier to break through to the primordial chaos Tao realm and become a Sage-to-Be before breaking through. Based on this point alone, Hong Jun deserved the title of Tao ancestor. After an unknown period of time, hundreds of millions of purple-gold rays of light suddenly burst out from the cauldron of heaven and earth, illuminating the chaos into a purple-gold color. It was extremely magical. Rumble. At this moment, in the depths of the chaos, endless Tao runes appeared and surged towards this place, entering the cauldron of heaven and earth. The heavenly Tao was about to be born, so it specially sent down a force to help him complete the final transformation and completely become a connate object. Chapter 238. Feng Zichen's many treasures were not wasted in the end. The heavenly axiom had already recognized the position of the human emperor. From now on, he was a position created by the heavens and earth. He contained supreme creation and was indestructible. Boom! After a loud bang, all the phenomena disappeared. The universe world that covered thousands of miles turned back into the small cauldron of heaven and earth. On the spot, 1 big and 9 small balls of light appeared. There were a total of 10 bright balls of light. The big one was purplish gold in color. It was surrounded by the great Tao and the birth and death of laws. There was a faint 9-clawed divine dragon swimming inside. It had great majesty and aura. The vast emperor's might suppressed the primordial world. On his body, one could see the myriad phenomena of the human race, the myriad scenes of the mortal world, and the changes of living beings. This was the position of the human emperor. If one obtained it, they would be the human emperor, the emperor of the human race. The small one was dazzling with golden light and surrounded by Tao runes. A 5-clawed golden dragon was faintly discernible in it, as if it had merged with the void. This was the position of the human king. If the human emperor did not appear, the human king would be revered. If one obtained this position, they would be the human king. They would be the leader of the human race and the leader of everyone. They would control the vast territory and assist the human emperor in governing the human race. They would be revered in the world. Now, Feng Zichen's position as the leader of the human race was equivalent to the human king. Although he was revered by the human race, his foundation was insufficient. He could only borrow the power of the human race and could not completely control it. At this moment, it was different. Feng Zichen was going to take a step forward and ascend to the throne. He would integrate all the power of the human race and firmly control it in his hands, leading the human race to glory. 1 emperor and 9 kings? Is this the will of the heavens? However, this is also good. With 1 person as the leader and 9 as the support, the overall structure of the human race will be more stable. It will be beneficial for the development of the human race. Looking at the 10 balls of light in front of him, Feng Zichen naturally understood what had happened. If he refined the human emperor's position himself, it would naturally follow his will. It would be as smooth as one and would not disperse the power. However, in order to make the human emperor's position a connate object, Feng Zichen attracted the power of heaven and earth. As a result, the refinement of the human emperor's position was completely controlled by the heavens and the earth, changing according to his will. Feng Zichen, the original owner, was kicked out and couldn't do anything. This led to the birth of the position of Ren Huang, with 1 master and 9 assistants. Otherwise, according to Feng Zichen's original intention, of course, he would only cultivate the position of Ren Huang in order to maximize his power. In the end, the considerations of the heavenly Tao are more comprehensive than mine. So be it. Both methods had their advantages and disadvantages. It was hard to say which was better or worse. However, such a situation was created by the heavenly Tao and could not be changed. Feng Zichen could not say that the heavenly Tao was not good. Moreover, perhaps the heavenly Tao's thoughts were more beneficial to the development of the human race. After all, the way of heaven was far beyond what Feng Zichen could compare to. His thoughts were not something that he could compare to. Human sovereign. He reached out and held the position of Renhuang in his hand. Feeling the powerful power coming from it, Feng Zichen was a little excited. After refining it, he could stand at the peak of the human race and become the emperor respected by tens of thousands of people. This was the human sovereign. It was related to the rise and fall of the human race and the life and death of tens of thousands of people. It could be said to be extremely glorious. Who didn't want to ascend to this position? Feng Zichen was no exception. Without the slightest hesitation, Feng Zichen operated his cultivation method with all his strength. Suddenly, a majestic power surged out and wrapped the position of Renhuang in layers, refining it. In the face of Feng Zichen's refinement, the position of Renhuang did not resist at all. Instead, it took the initiative to let go of everything and let him refine it. It was originally refined by Feng Zichen. The position of Renhuang was naturally close to him, so how could it resist him? Not long after, the position of Renhuang was completely refined by him. In an instant, a powerful force rose from Feng Zichen's body, stirring up endless wind and clouds. A terrifying force spread, setting off a huge tide of chaos in the chaos beyond the sky. At this moment, Feng Zichen felt an incomparable force rising in his body, making him extremely powerful. It was as if he had broken free from everything and was rising infinitely. This was the power of a quasi-sage expert. Rumble. A vast river appeared in front of his eyes. It was vast and boundless, and it surged forward without stopping. This was not the river of destiny, but the most mysterious and dangerous river of time and space in the primordial world. Under the suppression of Mount Buzhou, the river of time and space that should have been free for Daluo Jingxian to roam became extremely dangerous. No one was allowed to set foot in it. No, it was not that no one was allowed to set foot in it. When a quasi-sage expert broke through, the river of time and space would descend, allowing them to collect their past, present, and future bodies. Pangu had great love. Therefore, in order to protect the stability of the primordial world, he set restrictions and did not allow anyone to interfere with the river of time and space. However, the path of Tao was difficult for all living beings. How could Pangu stop all living beings from advancing? Therefore, every time a quasi-sage expert broke through, the river of time and space would automatically appear in front of him to help him break through. It was only at this time that the river of time and space was safe. When one stepped into it, they would not be suppressed by Mount Buzhou and could see the secrets of the depths of time and space. Now, with the help of the position of Renhuang, Feng Zichen's cultivation level had risen all the way to the late stage of the quasi-sage realm. He summoned the river of time and space from the unseen world, wanting to collect his past and present bodies. Unfortunately, his cultivation level was promoted by external forces. Although his realm and strength were at the late stage of the quasi-sage realm, a fake was still a fake. He could not completely erase his past and present in the river of time and space like a true late-stage quasi-sage expert. However, even so, Feng Zichen was still very satisfied. Whether or not he collected his past and present did not affect him much. Because Mount Buzhou was there, no one could interfere with the river of time and space. It was enough for him to have enough strength. Only strength was the foundation of everything. In this way, I can unleash the strength of a perfected quasi-sage. After adapting to his strength, Feng Zichen said excitedly. That's right. It was either the late stage of the quasi-sage realm or the perfected quasi-sage realm. Feng Zichen was the Daluo Jingxian who had attained Tao in the great chaos outside the realm. Therefore, he had no future in the primordial world. He, who was in the late stage of the quasi-sage realm, was equivalent to a perfected quasi-sage. Of course, this method was a bit of a trick. It made his strength far weaker than a true perfected quasi-sage expert. However, his realm was there. No matter how weak he was still stronger than the late stage of the quasi-sage realm. At this moment, Feng Zichen was the top great divine ability of the primordial world, second only to Kunpeng, Jin Yuanzi, and the others. However, while attaining Tao in the chaos gave him great benefits, it also brought him a lot of trouble. In the primordial world, only by integrating the past, present, and future into one could try to break through to the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian. However, Feng Zichen was different. In addition, he had to accumulate boundless magic power and cultivate his great Tao to the limit. Only then could he break through the realm barrier and become the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian. Chapter 239. This method seemed extremely simple. As long as he accumulated enough power, he could break through. But how long would this accumulation take? According to normal methods, Feng Zichen might not be able to accumulate enough power to achieve the Tao even when the immeasurable calamity descended. This was the Tao attainment method of the Chaos Fiend God. It was stronger than the Tao attainment method of the primordial world. At the same time, it was more difficult. It was almost impossible to succeed. In this world, there were gains and losses. Feng Zichen had attained the Tao and the chaos outside the realm. He had obtained so many benefits, so he naturally had to pay a higher price. Sigh. Who can tell the difference between gains and losses? With a sigh, Feng Zichen put away his unnecessary thoughts. He suddenly waved his hand in front of him and swept the 9 human king positions floating in the chaos into the destiny of the human race, allowing them to choose their own masters. Each of these 9 human king positions represented a Daluo Jingxian. In other words, as long as someone could refine them, their strength would definitely rise to the Daluo realm. To any force in the primordial world, the Daluo Jingxian was extremely important. The reason why Suiren, the other two, and Feng Zichen were able to attain the Daluo Jingxian realm so quickly was that they had great merit and great luck. Their innate origin was extremely rich, which was why they had achieved far more than ordinary people. But ordinary humans didn't have the same opportunity as the 4 of them. Therefore, it was extremely difficult for ordinary humans to break through to the Daluo Jingxian realm. Not to mention a million years, they might not even be able to break through to the Daluo Jingxian realm in their entire lives. Before Feng Zichen and the other 3, in the primordial world, no one could attain the Daluo Jingxian realm in a million years except for the innate god fiends. Therefore, the 9 human king positions were especially important. Even a pig sitting on the throne of the human king and grasping the power of the Daluo Jingxian for a million years would be able to break through to the Daluo Jingxian realm. The human sovereign persona was equivalent to a Daluo Jingxian creation tool. It could continuously create Daluo Jingxian for the human race. Unfortunately, an extraordinary item would only be obtained by an extraordinary person. This human sovereign persona was created by the heavens and earth, and its essence was extraordinary. Not everyone had the qualifications to refine it. Only those who have made great contributions to the human race can obtain it. I wonder if the current human race can produce 9 human monarchs. No, we don't necessarily need 9 supreme martial artists. 6 supreme martial artists are enough. As Feng Zichen looked at the vanishing human king position, he felt somewhat worried. In Feng Zichen's impression, the number of people who were qualified to become human kings could be counted on one hand. It would be somewhat difficult to gather 9 sovereign personages. Fortunately, as the human emperor, Feng Zichen had the power to appoint human kings. However, this action was to forcefully raise the position of others. The price to pay was too great. With Feng Zichen's current strength, forcefully appointing 3 human kings was already the limit. If there were more, it would damage his foundation. The gains would not make up for the losses. Therefore, as long as 6 human kings were chosen for the human king position, Feng Zichen would have the ability to make up for the remaining 3 human kings. The power of the human emperor? How is this possible? After putting away the cauldron of heaven and earth and the tree of world, Feng Zichen was about to return to the human race when he suddenly felt that something was wrong. His magic power was actually slowly disappearing. This gave him a fright. Magic power was the foundation of all magical powers. It could not be lost. At that moment, he did not care about returning to the human race. He hurriedly calmed his mind and checked his body to find the source of the problem. After his divine consciousness circled around his body, Feng Zichen discovered that what was disappearing was not only his magic power, but also his foundation, all the great paths that he had painstakingly cultivated. This discovery made him even more terrified. If his magic power was gone, he could still cultivate it again. However, if his great paths were gone, he would not be far from death. And the culprit that caused all of this was the human emperor position that Feng Zichen had just refined. One could see strands of purple gold divine light falling from the human emperor position, constantly obliterating his magic power and even his great paths. What's going on? Puzzled, Feng Zichen communicated with the way of the heavens, operated the purple star divinator, and calculated in his heart. At this moment, the heavenly favor on his body was very strong, and he was also supported by the power of the way of the heavens. When he deduced the secrets of the heavens, he really had the help of the heavens. In the blink of an eye, Feng Zichen calculated everything about this matter. This matter could be said to be a success and a failure of the imperial purple qi. As the most domineering power in the world, not only could the imperial purple qi obliterate the great paths of others, but it could also obliterate one's own great paths. It was just that this process was relatively slow. With Feng Zichen's strength, Daluo Jingxian might be able to hold on for 1,000,000 years before his great paths were obliterated and he fell into a deep sleep. This was only the human emperor position, and its power was not strong. One could imagine that when the human race became the protagonist of the world in the future, the power of the human emperor position would reach its peak. Not to mention Daluo Jingxian, even a sage-to-be wouldn't be able to hold on for long. No wonder the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of the later generations were so strong, but they only stayed in the position of the human emperor for 1,000,000 years before abdicating. So this is the root of it. That's right. Under the threat of the imperial purple qi, continuing to stay in the position of the human emperor will only lead to the obliteration of his great paths. It's better to retire after success and be carefree in the world. After coming back to his senses, Feng Zichen sighed with emotion. The 3 sovereigns of the human race were all sage-to-be figures, and their strength was second only to the saints. Each of the 5 emperors of the human race was no less than a late-stage sage-to-be. Such a powerful figure wanted to sit on the throne of the human emperor. With the luck of the human race on him, who could do anything to him? The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors could have sat on the throne of the human emperor forever, enjoying the limitless supreme position and dominating the primordial world. However, they abdicated early, which was puzzling. Now it seemed that it was not that they were unwilling, but that they could not. Heavenly path. There's really no room for loopholes. Obviously, this was a restriction set by the heavenly path. The imperial purple qi was so strong that it could be said to be an unsolvable existence. There were very few people in the primordial world who could compare to it. The more heaven-defying something was, the greater the restriction. Therefore, the imperial purple qi had the characteristic of not distinguishing between friend and foe. However, although the imperial purple qi is strong, it's useless to me. After knowing the reason, Feng Zichen immediately thought of a way to deal with it. The Emperor Star was the carrier of the path of the Emperor. With it around, no matter how heaven-defying the imperial purple qi was, it could not hurt it at all. Emperor Star, out. Feng Zichen formed a Dao seal and activated the origin of the Emperor Star, casting a shadow in his sea of consciousness. Under the illumination of the Emperor Star, the human emperor's status instantly restrained its power. The imperial purple qi also became extremely obedient and was completely controlled by Feng Zichen. Fortunately, the imperial purple qi was born after the witch and demon calamity. Otherwise, if Di Jun controlled this power, who in the primordial world would be able to match him? Feeling the power of the imperial purple qi, Feng Zichen thought happily. Di Jun was the celestial emperor. He was the lord of all living things in the primordial world and could preach on behalf of the heavens. This was the most noble Dao seat in the primordial world, and nothing could compare to it. Even when the human race was at its strongest, the human emperor was nominally lower than the celestial emperor. Even a saint was not as noble as the celestial emperor in theory. It was just that saints were above him and were not under the control of the celestial emperor. Di Jun was the most qualified existence to control the imperial purple qi in the primordial world. Just thinking about it was terrifying. Di Jun was already at the peak of the primordial world. With the help of the imperial purple qi, how strong would he be? It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was invincible in the world. Chapter 240. Mount Buzhou fell, causing the stars to shift and worship the Emperor Star together. For a time, the Emperor Star's starlight surged and appeared from the boundless starry sky. It replaced the sun and moon and became the new Lord of the Stars. When the Emperor Star appeared, the brilliance that belonged to the Lord of the Stars bloomed for the first time. It illuminated the primordial world, the universe, and the endless space and time. It was also at that moment that the Emperor Star's starlight and the wish power of all spirits interacted. It gathered the power of the three paths of heaven, earth, and man and formed the strongest power of the primordial world, the Emperor Purple Chi. The sun and moon hide, and the Emperor Star appears. Di Jun can't get the Emperor Purple Chi. Isn't it the restriction of the heavenly Tao on him? At this moment, Feng Zichen seemed to understand something. The heavenly Tao emphasized balance the most. The heavenly Tao would not allow any force that could dominate the primordial world to appear, for fear that it would break the balance of the primordial world. The celestial sect of wonders was powerful, and the demon sect appeared. The demon clan was powerful, and the wizard clan appeared. The three pure ones were powerful, and the Buddhist sect appeared. In short, any powerful force would have all kinds of problems, or the birth of a powerful enemy, or internal division. There were all kinds of reasons. In any case, the force that truly unified the primordial world would not appear. Interesting. I wonder what kind of opponent the heavenly Tao will prepare for the human race after the human race becomes the protagonist of the world to stop the human race from ruling the primordial world. After taking one last look at the depths of the chaos, Feng Zichen tore open the chaos outside the sky and returned to the human race. Feng Zichen firmly believed that the human race would become the true protagonist of the world under his leadership, not the puppet of the saints of the later generations. The ancestral land of the human race, the shore of the East Sea. The moment Feng Zichen became the human emperor, all the human race sensed it. A great throbbing suddenly surged in their hearts, as if a great existence had been born. Then, the torrent of destiny of the human race appeared, vast and mighty, covering the shore of the East Sea, forming a majestic emperor's shadow in the sky. It was Feng Zichen. Without any doubts, the moment they saw the emperor's shadow, the people of the human race naturally understood what it was. A surge of excitement from the depths of their hearts made them shout from the bottom of their hearts, "Emperor! Emperor! Emperor!" They understood in their hearts that this was the birth of the emperor of the human race. The human race finally had its own emperor. In the future, under the leadership of the emperor, the human tribe would officially announce its existence to the untainted land. It would enter the magnificent world and write its own glory. It was time for the human race to rise. The loud voices were in unison. First, they spread throughout the entire East Sea. Then, they spread far and wide into the East Sea. Countless aquatic creatures were shocked as they looked in the direction of the human race in shock and confusion. Idiot! In the ancestral dragon's sacred palace, the ancestral dragon's avatar could not help but curse when he saw the huge emperor's shadow that enveloped the human clan. His tone was filled with anger. As mentioned before, Feng Zichen becoming Renhuang was a foolish move in the eyes of the great divines. Seeing his choice, the ancestral Dragon was both shocked and angry. At the same time, this also showed how much ancestral Dragon valued Feng Zichen. Otherwise, why would the ancestral dragon lose his composure and ignore him? Crack! Several huge space cracks appeared. Feng Zichen walked out of the void and returned to the ancestral temple of the human race that he had been away from for a long time. Greetings, Your Majesty. Seeing Feng Zichen, the surrounding humans hurriedly knelt down and bowed to him. Emperor, Emperor, the changes in the ancestral temple immediately attracted everyone's attention. Not long after, all the clansmen knew that Feng Zichen had returned. They all shouted excitedly, like a tsunami. At first, there were only a few scattered voices. They were not loud or orderly. But soon, the cheers spread to the entire human race. They became louder and louder, more and more orderly. There was a boiling sense of passion, which was shocking. Infected by this aura, the flower of humanity above Feng Zichen's head kept trembling, as if it had obtained a connection with the existence of the underworld. Not long after, an inexplicable power appeared in the void. It was vast, boundless, and boundless. It emitted an aura that could contain everything. This was the mighty power of humanity. With the help of the flower of humanity, the shocking power of the human race was transmitted to the human race. It moved him and deliberately lowered a force. Rustle. With the descent of the mighty power of humanity, a ray of light rose above everyone's head. Billions of rays converged toward Feng Zichen, forming a purple-gold crown in the air and wearing it on his head. The crown was covered with connate Tao patterns. Divine light bloomed, and connate vitality fell. It was endless, containing all the vitality in the world and giving birth to endless changes. There were thousands of spirits surrounding it. There were many kinds of spirits, and all the races of the primordial world could be found on it. Unfortunately, except for the human race's figure, which was real, the figures of all the other races were illusory and would shatter with a touch. Connate treasure, myriad spirit crown. When the origin of the purple gold crown appeared in Feng Zichen's heart, he was shocked. Was this a connate treasure? Wasn't it a little too easy? Sigh. I knew it. Things aren't as simple as I thought. As more information about the myriad spirit crown was learned by Feng Zichen, the surprise and ecstasy in his heart gradually faded and was replaced by a sense of helplessness. The myriad spirit crown was a supreme treasure that gathered the power of all spirits and combined with connate vitality. It was a connate treasure nurtured by the human race. It contained the Tao of the transformation of connate vitality. With a shake of the crown, Tao light fell, evolving into the connate vitality of the primordial world. It flowed with light and colorful colors, protecting the body. It was so powerful that all evil would retreat and be invulnerable. Moreover, the myriad spirit crown contained the power of all spirits. With this crown, one would be protected by all spirits and have great luck. With a thought, all spirits would appear and fight with their master. Every strand of connate vitality corresponded to a race. The connate vitality combined with the power of all spirits and evolved into a flourishing era of the human race, crushing all existences. This treasure was extremely powerful, second only to the 3 heaven-opening treasures. Unfortunately, the power of the myriad spirit crown was closely related to the power of all spirits in the body. Only when the phantom of all spirits was completely solid could it unleash the power of a connate treasure. But now, only the phantom of the human race had barely solidified on the myriad spirit crown. The other races were just illusory shadows without any power. This also caused the power of the myriad spirit crown to only reach the level of a low-grade connate spirit treasure. It was completely unworthy of its status as a connate treasure. Sigh. Isn't this forcing me to attack all races and unify the primordial world? If he didn't obtain the recognition of all races, how could he restore the myriad spirit crown to the level of a connate treasure? And the simplest way to obtain the recognition of all races was to beat them into submission. Use absolute power to force them to submit. Chapter 241. Sigh, it's too difficult for me. At this moment, Feng Zichen's heart was filled with helplessness. He had become the human emperor because he wanted to lead the human race to occupy a place in this dangerous primordial world, develop his forces well, and wait for the future. However, this human emperor had to force him to become the true human emperor and unify the primordial world. It was simply forcing him. This human emperor was not the emperor of a race, but the emperor of the human Tao, the emperor of all spirits, who commanded all the lives in the primordial world. This position was already extremely noble. It could go against the heavens and replace the celestial emperor, becoming the master of all things in the world. In this era, it was impossible for the human emperor to succeed. Even if the human race prospered in the future and redefined the human Tao with the human race, the human emperor would still be a step away from the emperor of the human Tao. In Feng Zichen's memory, no one had been able to become the emperor of the human Tao since ancient times. There were only 2 people who were closest to this position in the primordial world, Di Jun and Fuxi. However, Di Jun was pursuing the position of the celestial emperor, which was 1 level higher. He was not interested in the position of the human emperor. At the moment when Fuxi was about to succeed, he stepped down from the position of the human emperor and lived in seclusion in the Red Cloud Cave. It seems that this innate cardinal treasure, the 10,000 spirit crown, is not easy to take. Even so, Feng Zichen still took the 10,000 spirit crown. There was no reason to give away something that he had already obtained. Besides, becoming the human emperor was only difficult, but it was not impossible to succeed. Let's wait and see. What if he succeeded? Get up. Nodding, Feng Zichen lifted the crowd below. An invisible force appeared and helped them up. Everyone, I have received the mandate of heaven to honor the human emperor. This is the manifestation of heaven's will. The human race has a great prosperity. At this time, it is time for us to go to the primordial world and develop our grand plans. The East Sea is too small after all. It can no longer accommodate the fate of the human race. Therefore, I've decided to establish another human imperial court outside the East Ocean as the foundation for our race to dominate the primordial world. Standing above the void, Feng Zichen had a panoramic view of the East Sea. He could not help but feel proud as he spoke to the crowd. He had long despised the coast of the East Sea. In such a small place, what great achievements could the human race possibly achieve? If it were not for the fact that the human race was too weak, he would have led the human race out of this place long ago. Yes, Your Majesty. With a swoosh, everyone knelt down again and shouted in unison. Not only Feng Zichen, but the other clansmen were also tired of the East Sea. They couldn't wait to go out and explore. Now, Feng Zichen's suggestion was exactly what they wanted. How could anyone object? Your Majesty, where will the imperial court be built? After a short while, Ji Shisher seemed to have thought of something and asked. Imperial court. At this point, Feng Zichen paused, looked up at the sky, and said in an inexplicable tone, I plan to build it in the sky. What? In the sky? Your Majesty, are you joking? How can there be a city built in the sky in this world? After hearing Feng Zichen's answer, everyone immediately began to discuss, thinking that he was joking. That was because they had never heard of anyone building a city in the sky. Even the legendary heavenly court was built on the heaven realm. It was dragged by the connate spirit clouds formed by the 9 heavens clear chi, not floating in the sky. At this moment, Feng Zichen suddenly said that. With their intelligence, they naturally could not imagine what the city floating in the sky looked like. They could not be blamed for making a fuss. It was really Feng Zichen who did not follow the rules. In the current primordial world, except for the demon race, all the clans used the earth as their foundation. Their foundations were all in the primordial world. They used the earth veins as the foundation to set up a connate formation and gather the connate chi from all directions. Firstly, it could protect themselves. Secondly, it could improve the cultivation environment. Thirdly, it could be said that there were many benefits. However, if the imperial court was built in the sky, how could they use the power of the earth veins to maintain the formation? Moreover, how much would it cost to keep a giant city floating in the sky every day? With the foundation of the human race, how long could it last? Therefore, the human elders and many Tai Jingxian were not optimistic about Feng Zichen's idea. That's right. I want to build the imperial court in the sky. I want to build a giant floating city in the sky. Nodding, Feng Zichen said with certainty. But, Your Majesty, the elders wanted to say something, but they were interrupted by Feng Zichen with a wave of his hand. I know all of your concerns. Don't worry. Since I dare to build the imperial court in the sky, I naturally have a perfect plan that has taken everything into consideration. Feng Zichen understood the thoughts of these human elders. However, the establishment of the imperial court was decided after careful consideration. How could it be changed by their words? Moreover, if he listened to the elders' suggestions, Feng Zichen did not know if the human race would be in trouble. However, he was certain that the human race would definitely not have a chance to prosper. It was not that Feng Zichen looked down on them, but these human elders. Ever since they were born, they had been staying in this corner of the East Sea. Their horizons had been limited. They did not know the vastness of the earth, the vastness of the sky, the supreme great Tao of the celestial sect of wonders, and the thousands of magical powers of the primordial world. They had long fallen behind and could not keep up with the times. It was not a big deal to float a city in the sky. In the primordial world, any Khanate race could easily do it. However, in their eyes, it was a fuss. This really disappointed Feng Zichen. At the same time, it also made him determined to bring the human race away from the East Sea. The human race could not stay in the East Sea any longer. If they stayed here, the current elders of the human race would be the future of the human race's descendants. Such a human race was terrifying just thinking about it. The lesson of the past was right in front of him. The human race had to leave. Only by seeing a wider world, increasing their knowledge, and broadening their horizons could they walk further and longer on the path of seeking the Tao. Yes, Your Majesty. Seeing Feng Zichen frown, the elders could not help but feel reverence and did not dare to say anything. It was not that Feng Zichen was threatening them, but that he had already become the human emperor, and his identity had changed greatly. He had the aura of an emperor and great majesty. He was related to the safety of the human race and had supreme power. He could decide the life and death of everyone with a single word. Therefore, his every move had great majesty, suppressing and stealing souls, making people feel reverence. All right, you can leave. Waving his hand and asking everyone to leave, Feng Zichen walked into the ancestral temple. With the human elders like this, it seemed that they could not be relied on to build the imperial court. Feng Zichen had to do it himself. The power of incense. This imperial court is related to the human path. Naturally, it has to be refined with the power closest to the human path. In the ancestral temple, Feng Zichen muttered. Chapter 242. The power of incense came from the blessings in the hearts of all living beings. It was a magical power, another manifestation of the power of the human path. It came from the same source as the human path. The imperial court that Feng Zichen wanted to build was not the imperial court of the human race, but the imperial court of the human path. This was his ambition. If he could not become the human emperor, then he would build a city that carried the human path. In this way, as the carrier of the human path, the imperial court of the human race would definitely become a powerful treasure of the human path. In the end, Feng Zichen would not stay in the human race forever. After the Great Witch Demon War ended, he would become Great Emperor Ziwei. He would personally oversee the boundless void and participate in the game of the top echelons of the untainted land. He would use the world as a chessboard and all living beings as chess pieces to calculate the past and future. He would fight with the great divines, the saints, and the world. He would create his own legend and open the path to the primordial chaos. This imperial court of the human path was the inheritance that he had prepared for the human race. It was meant to protect the human race's inheritance after he left. Come. He formed a seal with both hands. Mysterious runes flew out from his hands and merged into the surrounding void, causing an inexplicable throbbing in the surroundings. At the same time, Feng Zichen suddenly became sacred. His majesty was inviolable. He was like a high and mighty divine king looking down on all living beings. Rumble. Without any warning, the surrounding void suddenly shattered. The power of incense as vast as the sea surged from all over the untainted land. It was boundless and flooded this place. If this was not the human race's ancestral temple and was protected by Nua's saint power, the entire temple would probably cease to exist under the impact of the power of incense. The power of incense did not come from the human race. It came from the 3 Khanate clans and the untainted land. Otherwise, how could Feng Zichen, who had just exhausted the power of incense that the human race had accumulated for many years, take out so much power of incense? Even if the power of incense from the human race was not exhausted, it was far from enough to build the imperial court of the human path. Moreover, the human path ruled over all living beings. An imperial court built with the power of the human race could only belong to the human race and not the human path. Following Feng Zichen's actions, even more incense and willpower surged forth, causing the surroundings to become blurry. Nothing could be seen clearly. As the ancestor of the incense divine Tao, Feng Zichen naturally possessed the ability to mobilize the power of incense. Moreover, with this title, no matter who the people worshipped, Feng Zichen would get a share of the power of faith generated from the incense. The ancestor of a Tao was just that extraordinary. Otherwise, there would also not be so many great divine abilities people pursuing the position of Tao ancestor. In any case, according to what Feng Zichen knew, in the later generations, all the great divine ability people were called ancestors, without exception. From this, one could see the importance of the ancestor. Swear and lantern, refine. With a thought, Feng Zichen summoned the true body of the swear and lantern from the destiny of the human race. Immediately, there were lanterns that bloomed, endless and boundless, carrying the might of the people Tao, burning towards the boundless power of incense and will. This was the fire of the torch, formed by the civilization of the human race. It was passed down endlessly, and the torch would never be extinguished. Under the burning of the torch, the power of incense and will was constantly refined. Wisps of colorful mist rose, carrying a blurred color that made people intoxicated. The chi of 7 emotions and 6 desires. Feng Zichen, who had almost suffered a loss in this, was extremely sensitive to it. He hurriedly took out the mortal mirror and threw it into the void, letting it float in the air and absorb all the rising chi of 7 emotions and 6 desires. As the chi of 7 emotions and 6 desires was absorbed by the mortal mirror, what was left behind were pieces of colorless crystals that emitted a sacred aura, incense crystals. This was the material Feng Zichen planned to use to refine the human Tao imperial court. With the incense crystals as bricks, a huge city would be built. If such a divine city that was built with the power of all spirits could not bear the might of the people Tao, then what else in the primordial world could bear it? Fortunately, Feng Zichen could mobilize the power of incense and will of the entire primordial world. Otherwise, he would not have been able to refine the human Tao imperial court. There seemed to be a lot of humans, but in the entire primordial world, it was nothing. Not to mention the demon clan, even the nearby water clan outnumbered the human clan by several times. It was just that the East Sea was too small, so there seemed to be a lot of humans. It was precisely because he had the support of countless times more incense and goodwill than the human race that Feng Zichen came up with the idea of creating an imperial court of human Tao and put it into action. Otherwise, why would he work so hard to refine the human Tao imperial court? Was he dreaming? Unfortunately, Mount Shouyang is where the Grand Pure One's future Taoist field is. I can't touch it. Otherwise, I can directly move the humans there and use it as a new habitat for the human race to reproduce. Suddenly, Feng Zichen thought of Mount Shouyang and said regretfully. Compared to the East Sea, Mount Shouyang was undoubtedly more suitable for the development of the human race. It was favored by good fortune. The Khanate Chi was rich, the mountains and rivers were beautiful, and the rivers were clear. All of them revealed spiritual chi. Of course, more importantly, it was big enough. Even if there were dozens of times more humans, it could still accommodate them. Not only that, Mount Shouyang was connected to the central part of the primordial world. It was very important for the human race to increase their experience and broaden their horizons. There were also many Khanate races living there. If the human race were to go there, they would definitely face a survival crisis. It would not be as safe as the East Sea. Years of fighting would definitely stimulate the fighting spirit of the human race. It would give birth to powerful warriors, or even kings, to protect the human race. Unfortunately, Mount Shouyang was the Taoist field chosen by the heavenly Tao for the Grand Pure One. No matter how much Feng Zichen coveted it, he did not dare to touch it. Therefore, in desperation, Feng Zichen racked his brains to find a place for the human race to live. Only then did he think of the method to refine the human Tao imperial court. Just as Feng Zichen was in seclusion to refine the human Tao imperial court, the human kings also had their own choices. In East City, Yang was looking at Mount Shouyang. Suddenly, he saw a golden light coming towards him. Just as he was about to block it, the golden light merged into his body. Instantly, the aura belonging to Daluo Jingxian rose from Yang's body and shook the surroundings. And that was not the end of it. Golden light bloomed on Yang's body. It was extremely bright and made him look extremely majestic. This was the aura of a human king. At this moment, Yang became a human king. He controlled the vast territory and the lives of tens of thousands of people. He was the leader of the human race. In Chiao province, Youyu was in seclusion. Suddenly, golden light appeared and entered his body. It raised his cultivation to that of Daluo Jingxian. In Hong City, Dahong, the leader of the 3 generations of humans, was resting. He received the human king status and became Daluo Jingxian. In Li City, Dali, the leader of the 5 generations of humans, received the support of the human king status during a battle with an enemy. He became Daluo Jingxian and killed his enemy. In the East Sea, Feng, the leader of the 8 generations of humans, dating, merged with the human king status and became the human king.